a lot of what goes on in our minds is totally mysterious to us, in that though you could take an individual's choices and you could view them from the outside, and you could make a value judgment on what they're doing, you don't really understand why they're doing it or what's going on the inside. And on some level, neither do they, right? Like a lot of times we just make decisions, and even though we could say they're the right decisions to for certain outcomes or the wrong decisions, the individual is somewhat detached from the true explanation as to why they did that. And you could to some degree argue that that's where luck starts to creep back in, where how much of this is genetic disposition, how much of this is prior experience, how much of this is childhood trauma, why did you recoil, why did you respond that way, all of these things. And of course I kind of led with the point that it of course it's multivariate, and it's not like we're digging and we're digging and we're digging and there's just like this obvious core at the center of everything. It's more like a pie. It's a cornucopia. It's all these things that contribute to every single decision that we make.
Hey, there he is.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so stoked on this because I can officially welcome you to the Great Matters podcast.
Yeah, it's exciting time.
Yeah. So I know you've had me on your podcast, and I know you, Kevin, and I have done like a collaboration that we all shared. Well, I guess you and I shared. I don't think Kevin has a podcast. So I was just really excited to be able to welcome you to the Great Matters podcast, Brandon, and talk all about your mindset. And obviously we're going to share my mindset as well. But I'm just really fascinated because I'm really excited because you have a fascinating mindset and perspective and a way of going about things. So I'm really excited to explore that. So I want to officially welcome you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. I know we've got a good amount of I guess preamble to this conversation. We've talked a lot, so I'm just excited to what I think we have on the table, and just see what ground we can cover.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry, this clicking noise, it never fails. When I decide to do something that requires focus and audio, my dog that you know, Cheddar, and Fred just decide to like come in my space when they're just sleeping literally 2 minutes ago. And then they just want to come over here. So yeah.
Right. No, I totally get it.
And
Same thing happens.
Yeah, you get a couple animals at the house, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's a constant battle, but Miranda's holding them down right now. So
Jackie is not home yet. So they just it's crazy. Like it's like they know. Like for those that aren't watching, that are listening, I'm sitting here at my desk and my dog just decides to come over here and torture the cat by humping him, and you just hear all this clicking. That's them. Go away.
Yeah.
So
it's helpful context.
Yeah, very helpful. Yeah, man. So I just kind of want to throw a curveball at you, and just maybe not a curveball at you, but just to get things rolling, just see, how aligned are you feeling today?
That's a good question. Today's been a good day, honestly. As you probably know, I think it's been a week of kind of some ups and downs in the past few weeks, but today things have been clicking pretty well. I had a good meditation this morning, and I've just been kind of excited and building some energy for this podcast itself. And I feel like I've been pretty on my game, and I actually just kind of picked up another side gig. Just got an offer on the phone on the way home today, so I can't complain, and got some things in the works. So I'm definitely feeling pretty good.
Congrats on that, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that, and congrats. I know I just was talking to you a little while ago. I'm listening to a recent podcast episode that you just put out on Imposters Anonymous, which we'll talk more about that later. And you're talking about just exploring different opportunities and just seeing what's out there and just kind of being open to new things. So I'm excited that like just in the matter of maybe an hour or so since I heard you say that that you just shared that with me. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's like I said, it's been a good day. I put out a podcast. It's always a good feeling to get those out and see a new opportunity pop up, and something I'm excited for. So I really can't complain.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, cool. Well, let's start with what's gone well in this last year, and why? The reason I ask that is because I've come into this new perspective in my life, working with other people and then working with myself and just having conversations. You're a big part of this, and just really wanting to shift the perspective, right? Like, it's so easy for people of anywhere in the world to say what's going wrong, what we don't like. And I find often, with asking people like, what do you want? It's usually, I don't want X. And that's not usually what we want. That's what we don't want. So I just love to get your mindset on, what's gone well for you this year and why is that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the place I'd probably start with is just my relationship with my wife, and we're relatively recently married, and I guess we're coming right up on year 2. But I know that this whole year of, I guess, isolation and just context changing for everyone, it's I know it's been really hard for a lot of people in with their relationships, their intimate relationships, their marriages, even their friendships of all sorts. And I think I just am very happy to have been in that situation with my wife, and I, of course, couldn't imagine with anyone else. But I think it just really strengthened our relationship. So much time to spend together, and we were just able to really have some really deep and intense conversations that we always have had and thrived off of, but just having so much space and time together that we otherwise wouldn't, even though there was lots of other things that were challenging. But at the same time, it did force us to slow things down and just spend a lot of time together to work on projects together, to really use each other kind of as a sounding board to understand and contextualize and just work through everything that was going on in the world in a pretty challenging time. And I think it just really pushed us to grow in our relationship and just explore new territory. And always just, I think that's something I've always enjoyed about our relationship so much, is that we can be that sort of a resource to one another to just talk about literally anything. And I think it is a good segue to my second point, which is I I had this reflection that I felt like, um, though there's obviously something very positive about it, I also felt like at a time she was the only person that I could have those sorts of conversations with, because of how difficult it's become to have honest, just candid, good faith conversations with anyone out in the world, especially just about difficult and complicated topics. And at home was kind of the only place that I felt comfortable doing that. And in a way, I was like, man, I really wish that wasn't necessarily the case. I wish I could have more of these conversations with people that aren't just my partner. And so the latter half of that being that, as you've already mentioned, I started a project I've wanted to for a really long time, and something that has, it just ignited a lot of passion in my life. And I've built a lot of new relationships and just explored a lot of unexpected territory within myself, and had a lot of time to reflect. And I'm just really excited about where things are moving right now, and the momentum I've been able to build through that energy. So those are definitely two big points for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. And that's just what comes to mind. There's several things that come to mind, and we'll go to the second one in a second. But the first one, it's like, it's almost like something that many people would agree is a negative in life. And I think you and I share a similar perspective. I don't want to speak for you, but what I've gathered is, we can make meaning one way or another out of everything.
Hmm.
But I find that people like you and I, just from our conversations, we try to stay in a neutral position and look at things without
Hmm.
that emotional filter, if you will, towards something.
Hmm.
And by doing so, I've seen in what you just said and what I've gone through in the last year and what I've seen Jackie going through. Uh, for those listening, you should probably know who Jackie is by now. Um, that something that could be labeled as negative, as unwanted, undesirable, can actually have so much positivity in there, so much love, so much light, because it
Hmm.
makes you step away and take a step back, I should say, and stop and say, what can I take from this? Or in your
Hmm.
case, it allowed you, are they serious? They just turned the Roomba on. Come on, man. So I'm gonna have to mute this in a second so I go turn it off. But
Yeah, no
that's
worries.
that's so funny. But it seems like it was something that allowed you to take a step back, look at it differently, and then you had this success with your home life, and then now it led you to this project, connecting with other people. Would you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's I just was very fortunate to have those things just kind of link up, and to have to put that together, and to realize that, okay, this is not only is this something positive that I feel very strongly about, in regards to the relationship that I have with my wife, and our ability to really always be able to navigate these topics, and just really dig into things, and not always necessarily align, but also just having that comfort to be able to do that, and that being something that's so important to me as an individual, and who I am and how I relate to the world. But at the same time, being able to take that more outward and say, okay, this is something that I already feel good about, and I already can recognize as positive, but how can I scale that? How can I bring that to others? How can I make that something that isn't just a crutch? Like, I'm not just exploring that with a person that loves me unconditionally, and that knows everything about me, and that isn't going to judge me, and is going to support me no matter what. Um, how can I take that sort of uh, that sort of expectation, and take it to individuals that I don't even really know? And of course, I started with you. You were my first guest, and I'm always grateful for that. But I'm definitely happy to say that, like, at this point, it's also a situation where I've been able to talk with complete strangers, and people I have had no relationship prior to, and to be able to get to a place where I feel like I can have that similar kind of conversation that a year ago it almost only really happened within, these four walls, or within this total circle of trust, if you will. That it's definitely been nice to see that come together.
Yeah, it's awesome how something can start and then watch it evolve. And then by doing so, you're bringing so much value to other people. You're connecting with other people. And it's, like you said, outside of your four walls and your comfort zone. And that's, Fred just almost fell off the cat tree. I am, this is so absurd that this is happening right now. But I can't help but laugh. Like, it's just
No, I
wild
mean, it's
animals just
it's
in the
funny.
house.
I think I'm probably the right guest for it, because, as you know, I've got two cats, two dogs at home. It's a madhouse here, so I totally can relate, and it's all good.
What the other place I wanted to go with what you were just talking about was something that I think is interesting with, COVID and 2020 in general, like that one could look at as a negative, as definitely an obstacle for everyone involved. It for me, I think it was like my biggest year of self-development. Like, for me, going on a plane pretty much every weekend for, the last year up to that point, and then on a plane regularly before that when I was competing in BMX, things like that, like always on the go, always traveling.
Mhm.
It allowed me to be, it didn't allow me, but it forced me to be at home, or at least in the same town or state, for more than just a couple of weeks at a time. And
Mhm.
it really allowed me to start looking within, to ask myself those challenging questions of, why do I feel this way? Why am I thinking this? Why am I experiencing that? Ask myself, like, why do I see, like, what's going on out there? Like, how could that be? And it led me to looking at things in a different light. Like, what can I do right now? Like, a lot of things were out of the question. But then
Mhm.
as things started kind of opening up, it was like, I've been thinking about, for where I'm going with this is where we met. I'm thinking
Mhm.
about, like, what have I wanted to do that I've always given the excuse about, I don't have enough time, or I'll do
Right.
it later, something like that. And float tank sessions were one of the float tank therapy, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the proper terminology is, deprivation
Mhm.
chambers, something like that.
Yeah.
Float pods. And I was like, oh, cool. I found this place. I connected with just a stranger, essentially, months prior
Yeah.
on social media. And he was like, hey man, I'm working at this spot. You should come check it out. And I was like, all right, cool. And the one time I scheduled it with him, went and did it, I walked out into the waiting room, or the after float place with the
Yeah.
oxygen and
The
the
debrief.
tea. Yeah. You were there, and I was like, oh, this is
Mhm.
cool. And then we started talking, and I think that was really fascinating, because for me, it was like you were describing with your wife. The four walls at home of comfort, of security, of safety, of have these deeper conversations. In the space that we met, it was just welcoming. I feel like, yeah, like we
Mhm.
obviously weren't like just sharing everything right away, but we were having
Right.
a conversation that I don't typically see other people having for the first time, or experiencing myself having for the first time with the majority of people I meet. And then you and
Mhm.
I just kind of went in on some deeper topics right off the bat, and then led
Mhm.
us to becoming good friends, and then being here today. So that's something I'm super thankful for, that went really well, was just that pause. And then I tried new things, and then I was like, oh,
Mhm.
there's other people that think like me, or that are going through similar things, and we can relate and connect. And then that's led us here.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was I think an incredibly unique way to meet, but in a lot of ways ideal. And of course, you can't really manufacture that. But I think we both almost, in a way, we're kind of coming out of a pretty intense experience and coming out of a situation in which our minds had really been opened, and we were kind of in this. Almost in this soft form, if you will, where you're just kind of like you're coming back to the world, and um, so I think we were in a uniquely valuable place to just be open and to be honest and to be willing to just do the things that you otherwise might not. And I think it was one of those situations where, and though it's generally something I push myself to do, it easily, that could have just been a conversation and then we never saw each other again. I mean, that would be a totally normal thing to happen. Um, and it was actually my birthday that day, so I had like other plan. I had someone waiting on me, but I think we had a strong connection, and we had a conversation going that I felt like wasn't worth just leaving, and it felt very natural. And I think it was just a good opportunity to exercise some, I guess, just initiative, really, because we like I said, we easily could have just walked away from it and not exchanged information, and by all accounts we wouldn't have seen each other ever again. But I think just coming out of that experience and having just challenged myself in a kind of unexpected way, and just having that initiative to be like, actually, let's just let's link up some other time, and let's see where it goes. And here we are. So
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think back to the point you just made. I think back to so many times where I met people that maybe I found interesting, but my own insecurity, my own programming, that was like, yeah, you meet someone, you just say, well, bye, unless you have like some similar interest where you're doing the same thing, and it's like, oh, well, let's do this again. But like it's so often where it's just like you come across people that you just meet, and they could become some cool friend or connection, or there's so many different possibilities. But I think you and I were in a similar space of like, let's try something new, which was, for me, it was my first time floating. I think for you it was the second time, if I remember correctly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
had
then
once before, but years ago.
yeah, and then so moving forward from that was like, all right, well, rather than like, let's just leave it, like I think you and I both were intentional about like not being too forward, like, yo, bro, like, let me get your number. Like, but it was just like, hey, yeah, like we should, catch up sometime, and like, just, shoot the shit and see where it goes, and then let us hear. And it's funny you mentioned people waiting on us, because I think Miranda and Jackie had a very similar experience of like not
Mhm.
understanding the time frame of the float itself. And then we obviously get lost in conversation for like 20-30 minutes after.
Right.
But I think that was a funny synergistic response from either one of our partners.
Yeah, and I'm sure they've talked about it and just been like, what were they doing?
Well, because I think Mitch too, he said he was like scared, because Mitch and I went together, and he was like, yeah, I thought you got like trapped in or something. Like, and I was like, what? It's like, like, this is supposed to be like Zen Central, and you're just like tweaking out. Like, it's just
Right.
such a funny thing. But
You got a
I
lot of people checking on you.
yeah, no, I guess it's a good thing, who cares? So it's all good. Well, I think this is a good place to segue into one of the first things I really wanted to talk with you about. And that's, from your perspective, you were sharing, I asked you to share some talking points, because I know you and I could like just go and go on like one thing. And I wanted to make sure
Right.
we covered a lot of ground that was relevant to us, our lives, and what other people are going through. And I found one of the things, and I think I told you before we were talking today, that I rearranged a lot of the flow for today. I don't normally do this. I've been actually practicing this with recent guests, of like getting their feedback of like, what do you want to talk about? Like what fuels you? And
Mhm.
then taking my perspective on like my perception of them and what I'm interested in, making a flow. And so
Mhm.
one of the things I think is really suiting where we are right now was finding the delicate line between what is within and outside of our control. And I
Mhm.
think 2020 was a very profound example of challenging people to see what is and isn't in their control, and what we would argue maybe isn't. There is no such thing as control of or
Mhm.
anything in our control.
Right.
So I want to see, what is your take on this fine line of control in and out, and like, do you believe in control?
Right. Yeah, I mean it's a huge question. It's a very interesting egg to crack into, but yeah, I mean I think it's an incredibly delicate line, and it's I think we move through most of our lives having essentially no idea where it really is. And I think there's a lot of guesswork involved, and to some extent, I think in times of trouble, it's maybe the safer bet to assume uh as much as possible is outside of our control, and to try to consolidate what we understand and quote unquote know to be in our control, and to focus on that. So whether that be the way that we eat, or our just any of our habits, the people we spend time around, our work, whatever it is, I think we tend to lean on those things because it seems very direct and straightforward. um, but I think, when I guess keeping it relevant to this last year, when something global, something big like this happens, that's maybe once in a generation, and everything is kind of swirling around you in a way that's confusing and frustrating and painful, and but very collective. It's and it seems very much out of your control, and I think there's two sides of it, because it's this like it's the perfect example of this like outside nebulous force that just kind of came upon us, and no one quite knew how to contextualize or deal with at first. And then I think some people started to realize in time, like, okay, I can do my part, right? I can do what I can to take care of my people and my family, and make sure I keep everyone else that I can safe and comfortable, and all of that. And I think that's where people find some comfort as well, where it's like, okay, I'm contributing. Whether you're donating to an organization that's helping with COVID relief, or you're volunteering at a hospital, you're doing whatever. I think it helps for people to feel like there's a way in which they contribute to something bigger and collective and difficult that happens like this. But at the same time, it all gets very gray very quickly. And when you look at all of the information, or better yet, misinformation that came out last year, I think that's where it gets that's a great example of where it starts to get complicated, because I think people might have a sense that they are helping, or that something is within their control, but at the end of the day, if they don't have the right information, you could actually be making a problem worse, that you feel like you're helping, but at the end of the day, for you, it's important for you to feel like you're doing the right thing, like you're contributing. So I guess it's a roundabout way of getting there, but what I'm getting at is that I think at the end of the day, it's I'll compare it to the placebo effect in a way that, like, I think some sense of perceived control is important in life, right? At least on some level, that we need to feel like what we're doing is that there's purpose in it, that it is quote unquote right. And if we don't have that, we're going to be very dissatisfied, unhappy, irritable on a daily basis. And I think a lot of people do live in that mode, but I think a lot of people also live in this other, maybe not directly contradicting mode, where they maybe feel internally as though what they're doing is purposeful, and that they're making the world a better place. And I think those are generally pretty happy people, which I think is a good thing. But if you peel it back a layer, once again, this is where it starts to get more complicated, and why it's such a huge jumping off point is that something that's truly measurable, and do we really understand why things happen? And um that is something that is ultimately incredibly subjective. So you could, from one perspective, say, okay, if this makes someone feel good, if this enriches their life, if this allows them to live in a way where they feel free to do what they want, they feel in control, they feel responsible, they feel like they are pushing things forward, and that works for them. I don't intend to rob anyone of that. I would never, I would never want to take away anyone's happiness or joy. But to some extent, I think also some people uh, maybe just don't quite have the luxury of seeing it that way. And we still have the problem of trying to figure out how we help people who maybe take things to a more analytical level and start really asking questions and pressuring things and pushing things like control and free will and choices to an extreme extent, and saying like, if you just keep asking why, if you just keep asking how, it becomes very hard to paint a picture of reality in which an individual has control over more than they don't. And if it feels like you overwhelmingly have less within your realm of control than not, it's it just becomes much harder to move through life in this kind of stoic, empathetic, optimistic manner that I feel like is feels like it's compatible with living a good life. But it's it's easier said than done, I guess, for some, once you maybe once you've peeled that layer back a little bit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. And what comes to mind, it sounds like it's like this sense of perceived control can allow someone to feel like they can generate the fuel to move forward in their life to create
Mhm.
the reality they want. That is subjective, but it's based on this sense of perceived control. And I was actually just talking to my buddy Jimmy the other day about, with his NFL athlete or athletic career, he was like, I was always striving for perfection. Not that that is a reality, but that expectation is what was, building my identity and driving my behavior and all my actions and my efforts. And it allowed me to become, a small minority of people at that top elite performance level. And so,
Mhm.
with what you just said, it's interesting because what comes to mind for me is like this perceived sense of control will allow us to almost feel safe or to feel like we can have faith in our actions and
Mhm.
creating our reality rather than saying, well, everything's up to fate and whatever. Like I have no control in
Right.
anything, no control in the next 5 minutes, let alone my future beyond that. Why even bother? And I actually
Mhm.
I found myself in that thought process sometimes in the past of like, well, if I can't control this, then like what's the point of even trying to better my position in life?
Mhm.
Like this, I come from here, so I'm destined to go there. But I've taken the narrative of looking at like where I've gone in my life to be like, well, there's been some things I would at least think were in my control. One could argue that there isn't, and which I actually have a
Mhm.
topic I think is something you introduced me to that I want to talk about next. But I have come to this place where I have a firm belief that you can't control outcomes, but to a small degree that, or I should say, I feel like there's a large degree that you can control the way you look at the world, the way you look at yourself, which is going to drive how you think and feel and behave. So therefore, you'd have a higher probability of creating an outcome that you want, even though we know that we can't control that happening or not.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I just got lost in that thought process, but like when you were explaining that as it pertains to last year and this year and just in general life, it's almost like this sense of perceived control will allow us to feel safe and knowing that our efforts are going to go somewhere productive. But then I also find that that could be a fine line of getting too attached to control and this
Mhm.
concept of control. So then where you're not getting the results you want, and then you blame it on your efforts not being enough or something like that. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think it's something that, I guess, for example, it's if you have ambitions, if you have something that you're reaching for, if you have a goal, anything of that nature, it is incredibly hard to put like even just significant amounts of effort and diligence behind that without feeling like achieving that outcome, as you already said, is within your control, right? Because to sit there and accept and to say, hey, this is something that I want, but it might not be within my power to get it. It might not look what I think what it'll look like, even if I get there, and to still put in all of the incredible amount of work that it would take to get there, knowing that maybe it just won't break your way, or maybe it won't even be what you want when you get there. That is so fucking difficult, right? And so it sometimes it seems almost like you have to have this sense that it is within your power, that you can almost bend the world to your will. And to be fair, it seems as though some people manage to capture that. You take someone like I don't know, an Elon Musk or a Kanye West, who, um, I'll stick with Kanye for a second. Like, clearly, this man thinks that he is capable of anything, right? He said it a million times, much to a lot of people's chagrin. Um, and what makes him a very polarizing figure is this like incredible self belief that he has. But at the same time, he has done so much. He's accomplished so many incredible things. He's one of my favorite artists, regardless of what I think about him as a person. And I think a lot of that comes from the place that he is someone who just also he can marry those two things, where he has that self-belief, but he also has this incredible talent. And as we've spoken to before, you don't really hear about the people that have the incredible self-belief who never accomplish anything. But it seems almost like it's like this prerequisite that you have to have this almost irrational degree of self-belief to achieve the highest uh, accomplishments that you can in this life, at least in the more material or tangible sense. um and it's almost asking people to like to be this to be a saint or to be a monk, to be able to kind of cut through that illusion of control, but also still behave as though it is there, and to treat themselves in a way that would allow you to get there without attachment to the outcome itself, knowing that to some degree the value of what you're doing is, I guess, not to be cliche, but in the journey, and that you might get one step away from the promised land. I guess, to make a biblical reference to anyone who resonates with that at all, that you might be one step away, as Abraham was, and never get to go, but the value is still kind of there in the journey, even if at the end you don't actually accomplish the thing that you wanted. um if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I think on the note of self-belief and illusion and things like that, I mean, I can speak from my own experience of what I was told was possible for my life, from who I am, from where I come from, and people that don't do what I wanted to do. Um, are you serious? The cat is turning on the Roomba again. He's just sitting on it. To other great people in the world of history, the famous Dr. Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Like, people said, you're crazy. That makes no sense, because it doesn't now. You can't see it, feel it, hear it, or
Hmm.
experience it with your senses. So yeah, it makes no sense now. Gandhi, like Jesus, like Michael Jordan, like all these people that are very famous figures of history and culture, they were defined by something in their mind that was not yet, and that's what was driving them forward. And
Hmm.
every one of them, I would argue, if it isn't already evident from their mouths, had this incredible self-belief or belief in that vision that they were working towards, or that movement that they were creating. And one of my favorite hip-hop artists, Russ, in his book, he talks about the importance of optimistic delusion in what you want, because there's going to be so many people projecting their own bullshit onto you about why what you're trying to do doesn't make sense. You're crazy, you're going to fail, like, why would you do that? That's not smart. And it takes that self-confidence, that self-belief, that optimistic delusion, that illusion of reality that is not yet, that is drawing you towards that, that's going to dictate your behavior, that's going to have a higher probability of creating that outcome in your life. And I honestly feel like that's why so many people are not happy with where they are. On the macro, there's obviously a lot of micro in there, because they don't believe in themselves from whatever nonsense that they absorbed or modeled or inherited. And then they're the ones that are saying, like, I hate this fucking term, it must be nice. I don't know how many times I've heard that in my life, and I'm like, yeah, it is fucking nice, because I worked my ass off for it. But that's my experience. I was grateful and fortunate to have a family, to support my dream, but I had a lot of people saying no. And for other people, like Kanye, like, so many people judge that person from an outside perspective, and they'll say, oh, he's got a big ego or this or that. And like, that's a whole nother topic you and I can talk about, like the word ego and what that is.
Mhm.
But it's just someone that is like his Rogan episode. I had so much respect for him after listening to that. And I still don't know much about him other than listening to that and then reading things in the media about
Sure.
him, which,
Mhm.
we obviously know there's a lot of facade there. But hearing him speak from his mouth, his mind, and what he refers to as symphonies of his
Sure.
words, it was just so fascinating because I was like, this is not like a negative person. This, to me, this isn't like a sick person. This is just someone that his brain's wired differently, is passionate, has this vision, and it's keep getting told you're crazy, like you need to do this and like get on these meds and all that. And it's like, no, like this person believes in what they want to create. And it's, to me, what he's doing, as the example you used, it's more than just him. It's bigger than him. And I think all the great people in history have always had this vision that maybe started off on self or started on other people, this purpose, but it always consumes other people than just them.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, and not to like totally crack into a different can of worms, but like it kind of goes back to where we started as far as where's the line truly. And of course, maybe the most honest answer is that to some degree it's subjective, but yes, like of course, Kanye has had so many people. He receives a lot of criticism. He gets a lot of hate, and I saw that episode as well. And it's one of those difficult situations where it's like, okay, what is crazy, right? Where is the line where someone and I hate to use the word ought, but like ought to be medicated, and you know that like the whole mental health landscape is something that is pretty close to my heart and I'm pretty tuned into, and it really does, it gets complicated on so many levels, because you take anyone who, as we've spoken to, anyone who has done anything I guess noteworthy in the conventional sense. You take a Salvador Dali, or you take a Prince, or anybody that you would put on that pedestal who was innovative and unique, and really just pushed culture forward, and did something that was totally unprecedented. They're going to receive that label, and it really just brings into question what that means to us, and where we draw the line between someone we say, okay, this person needs to be controlled, this person needs to be, we need to temper what is within this person, or do we need to harness that, do we need to encourage that, do we need to uh, push them to really feed into this and just generate what they generate, but also do we still want that even if it's at their own expense, right? I think we see a lot of that with artists, because I think you have to be a little bit disorganized and a little bit different psychologically to be able to do that sort of thing on a high level, and to really think in a way that others cannot. But at the same time, you start to use the same terminology that you use in psychology textbooks when we're talking about people who have disorders. And so it's one of those things that it's very hard from the outside to sit there and say, okay, this person, we're going to put you in this bucket, and this person we're going to put you in that one, and we're going to encourage this person, and we're going to put this person in an institution. But um I guess I say all that to say that the lines are very, very delicate there, and I think it's easy from the outside to judge, and to feel as though we understand, or we can make some claim about anyone's subjective experience, and how they ought to behave, or how we ought to orient ourselves around it. But at present, we just don't understand these things well enough. And I think it's important that we keep the individual's well-being in mind. And if we take, just to keep the example going, if we take someone like Kanye and we say, okay, if we feel like if what he's doing is making him feel satisfied, it's enriching his life, he's able to have positive relationships, he's able to not hurt anyone, he's living a generally positive life, I think maybe that's part of our answer. But I think if we start to see the opposite, if we see these people having mental breakdowns, we see these people turning to hard drugs, we see these people nearly dying in overdoses, I think that's when we have to say, okay, maybe we should have said to them a little bit, maybe let's dial this back a little bit, or maybe let's tune into some other modes of your personality a little bit, and have more of a holistic perspective that isn't so tied to your achievements, your outcomes, your outputs, as and whatever it is that you do.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think there's a spectrum as well, because what you just spoke to there for a second is a very extreme end of the spectrum where someone needs to have supervision or medication. We know medication is not always the solution, but it's definitely necessary. I mean, medication, medicine, modern medicine, surgeries like saved my life.
Hmm.
So I'm not anti one or the other, but I think
Sure.
there's a spectrum. And I think the vast majority of people fall in the middle. And because society is a society and there's these unspoken or spoken rules of how to operate in society, and how you should present yourself and what you should do, it labels certain people as odd or crazy or not mentally well when they just think differently. And I mean, I'm speaking on my own experience of when I was younger. I was put on Ritalin or whatever, like ADD, ADHD medication, because I was a
Hmm.
a young child with a lot of energy, and that was bad because I was meant to
Hmm.
be in class for 8 hours and just sit there and raise my hand and do what I was told.
Hmm.
But there's so many people, like, and I think this is really common with artists, especially a lot of athletes, but like Shia LaBeouf, for example, Jim Carrey, like they're very open about their mindset and their emotional states and what drove them to, like Shia was talking about. I think it was like a clip on Ellen years ago. He's like, there was this void of me, just wanting to leave a mark, like me wanting to just be heard or seen. Jim
Hmm.
Carrey talks about how he needed to get, fame and fortune, to realize that wasn't going to make him happy. And so it's like people just think differently and they operate differently. And I think if people are just being their own creative self, it's just, I think now it's starting to shift where society, is welcoming that. And
Hmm.
it's not like, all right, if you're not operating like the majority, then you're crazy. But if you're operating like the majority, you're not. But then you're essentially killing that person. Like that person's dying inside
Hmm.
because they're forming to the other people. And I don't know if this is getting a little off topic, but this is just where my mind went with like that whole, like looking at like someone like Kanye and being like, you need to be doing this because what you're doing is not a part of what society thinks you should be doing. But
Hmm.
what he's doing, he's, seems to be incredibly happy doing, expressing himself, not suppressing himself, which we know suppressed
Hmm.
emotions lead to, dis-ease in the body, which leads to disease and all sorts of nonsense. But there's so much value that comes out of that person just being themselves. Of course, there's context with, how far down that spectrum are they,
Hmm.
and things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of the societal norms, one, suppresses people's authenticity and their true self, but then it also may, I honestly like think about, these expectations. I think about, like, Robin Williams comes to mind. um, these different types of figures that reach this success and aren't, the norm, and then have these perceptions of them, and then when they change something about them, people are like, what's going on, that person must be, whatever. And then
Hmm.
I feel like that messes with people's mental states as well. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know, do you get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's such a clusterfuck, for lack of a better term. Like
It's true.
anytime anyone becomes famous, right? Because especially when it's tied to what they produce, especially in a
Mhm.
in a artistic sense, but even not that, because it's so intimate to them and to who they are and their identity and how they think about themselves. And especially when you're famous for a long time, so for decades of your life, even starting at a young age, your value has been derived from what you've been able to create or provide to other people. And as a consumer, a lot of times we don't really consider the individual there, and we enjoy the art, or enjoy the output. We love the amazing game winning shot, and even if that person, maybe it was the worst day of their fucking life, right? Maybe they're suffering in ways that we could never understand or know. But generally, as a consumer, we can plead ignorance to some extent because we never really know what anyone is going through. But at the same time, I think we often are a little bit too disconnected from the fact that these are just individuals who, in order to just by nature to be able to do the sorts of things that these people are doing, are sacrificing immensely on a mental health front, and they're giving their whole lives to do this thing, to perform for us, for whatever that means. And as you said, when expectations change, or people, lose the they're not quite as shiny as they used to be, or people decide that their work is gone in a new direction that we don't like, or they do something new and it gets rejected, and that is essentially been the entire source of their value to society previously. Of course that could be incredibly detrimental, but at the same time, it's also like, what are these individuals really experiencing, and can we be more interested in that regardless of what it is? Like, even if someone changes, as all people do, can we accept, can we pull back a little bit and look at the broader picture and say, wow, like, look at this person who once did something like this and now is able to bring us something totally new. And even if it doesn't totally suit you, or it's not for you, that's fine, but it's not a reason to judge anyone, or to put anyone down, or to do anything that might make someone feel uh, like it's not worth them being around anymore. Like, these people are put under such immense microscopes and pressure, and so many people, we end up losing them because they, as I said before, they have to turn to other unhealthy coping mechanisms, or they just can't deal with the pressure, they can't deal with the weight. And we almost just see that as like a tax of sorts on their outputs, and we grieve when they happen, but ultimately, typically, we just move on from it, and we don't necessarily change the way that we relate to the people that we look up to and that we idolize and that we put on these pedestals. That, of course, you put someone up on a pedestal and you're giving more clearance for them to fall at some point. um, and I guess, once again, I say that all to say that I think the remedy on some level is just to remember that everyone is human, and that everyone will change, and that everyone is probably dealing with some really heavy shit that we would have no way of understanding or being aware of. And just kind of approaching the way that we interact with these people, and think about them through that lens as much as we can, I think just at least provides a little bit of distance for people to, just be a human, and like figure things out and make mistakes, and go through hard times, and go and be volatile, and have struggles without it being like something that we relish in, or have to talk about at lunch every day, when these are real people's lives.
Yeah, and note of that, what's your take on the pursuit of truth behind the facade of what like the majority of people see from people in the limelight? Like for me, two personal experiences that come to mind for me. One was I met this person once in my life, which I was very fortunate to. Someone I look up to quite a bit, and I love his music, his art. Mac Miller. He passed away from being, he was messing with drugs, but I guess there was contaminated with something he didn't know was in there. So
Mm.
but he also has a very deep history of drug abuse that was in a lot of his music, and he's not afraid to talk about it, or wasn't afraid to talk about it, because it led him to the art he created, and it was just what he was going through. And then he went through a sober time, things like that. But then, his music started blowing up after, because he passed. And so people are like, oh, they started to recognize his music and be like, oh, he's a human. He was suffering. A lot of his music was talking about that, but it was almost like this like, I don't know what the word is, but like he was suffering, but he was creating art that was bringing all these people that felt isolated like him together in support of something, and he was able to facilitate that. And then Dave Mira, another person who I was very close with, a person I looked up to growing up. I had posters of him on my wall. He ended up passing away. He took his life. He was diagnosed with CTE, which, for those that don't know, it's the best way to describe that is like it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's like consistent, not consistent, but like reoccurring
Repetitive.
traumatic, repetitive, reoccurring traumatic brain injury over time develops these complications in the brain, and it changes the wiring and who you are. And that was something that I had a very, very hard time with, because 3 days prior, I was at his house hanging out with a friend of ours and him. The day before that, I asked him to lunch because I was in a pivotal moment of like changing careers. I was done competing in BMX and I wanted to do something else. And I was like, I mean, I have like the Michael Jordan of my sport, Dave Mira, like
Hmm.
video games, was on TV, like he lived the
Hmm.
life. Like, who better to ask advice than my friend that I get to call a friend? And so we went to lunch for like 2 hours and he seemed completely normal to me. And it was in my mind, I framed it originally as I was looking for support from him. And I never once asked how he was doing. Because in my
Hmm.
mind, I had this facade. Like I had this perception of like, it's fucking Dave Mira. Like he's good. He
Hmm.
looks good. You know, money's not an issue. He's got a great wife, great family, two daughters. Like he's just doing his thing. Like he's
Hmm.
good. Like I'm over
Right.
here struggling.
Hmm.
And then after, when he passed, I was like, fuck, like he was suffering and I didn't know. And I went
Hmm.
through a hard time. Like I was actually stuck in bed for like 3 days, depressed. Obviously, we lost Dave Mira, but then I just felt so guilty because I was like, man, I was in this position where I could have asked him like, hey man, like you want to talk? Like it wouldn't have changed anything. I know that now. In retrospect, always does that. But this aspect of, looking at the truth of what we see on the internet or what we see on TV, because I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of celebrity status people and become friends with them and to learn
Hmm.
about them, I should say, learn their story, learn what they have going on. And I'm really fascinated with people that are in the limelight and learning their stories. Like I love stories. I love learning, like, how did that person get to become who they are? Like, what did they do?
Hmm.
What did they learn? What did they experience? Because I'm ultimately trying to get to a vision that I'm creating. And I want to know what successful people that I see as successful, what they did. And so bringing this back to the original intention of saying all that is,
Hmm.
I have found that it's so important to look past the filter that is social media, that is television, that is movies, that is music, for the face value, and look into, what that person maybe has going on, whether it's a famous person or it's just your friend, or it's, in my case, I think you share a similar experience with my brother. I I don't know. I don't want to get caught up in that, but I'm just curious of like, I guess we can go there, but like, what is your like perspective or understanding or passion for finding the truth in things beyond like what they seem like upfront for face value?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question, and it's of course something that I'm very interested in, and you know that about me. I think it's one of those things that's often it's almost like those little Russian dolls. I forget the exact name, but you keep opening it and there's another smaller one inside, and you keep peeling back more and more layers, um, and it can be. I think in some ways it's hard to know when you've reached the core, right? And I know that's kind of an abstract thing to say, but I think yes, I feel like I'm someone who is relatively attuned to getting past that first layer, right? Because I think that first layer we all know is just bullshit, right? I mean, I don't think anybody out there is really believing that everyone is quite what they appear to be on the surface. And maybe I'm giving people too much credit, but I think most people have some sort of recognition that the surface isn't quite real. What you see on TV, what you see on social media, the smiling faces all the time. It's you get through life at a certain point, you realize that a lot of that is just people trying to get through, and not everyone can express how they feel all the time, even when they're dealing with shit. And people just have to keep showing up for their jobs, for their families, for their responsibilities, regardless of what's going on. And maybe they don't even always want to give you the real shit, right? Like sometimes that's exhausting. I don't want to be talking about my shit all the time. Like it just wouldn't work. I couldn't do all these other things that I want to. So I think on some level that's something that we all recognize, and I think it's something I always want to try to push past, each layer, wherever it may be, and get to what is maybe at the core. But something that I encounter, and I guess is very relevant to our conversation today, is that it's sometimes you don't know when to stop, or as I said from the start, like what really is the core, or when is there really another layer, and what is the actual implicit cost of continuing to dig beyond that. And I think that's sometimes what is missed, that uh, I think at base it's something that I support and I'm super interested in. But sometimes I think people peel back too far, or sometimes people, you try to go too deep just for the sake of going deeper, not realizing, okay, maybe my optimal level of honesty, maybe my optimal level of direct experience with reality is not truly at the core, and maybe that's not something I'm prepared to handle, and maybe that's just not optimal. And I think sometimes it feels as though we should just dig deep at all costs, and you get kind of barreling down that alley of, let's just keep going for more no matter what. Let's get to the base of everything. um, and it's something that I guess it relates a lot to meditation and psychedelics, or plant medicine, or any sort of thing that I feel like is in that vein, where you're trying to get in touch with truth and reality, and you're trying to remove detachments and illusions from your life that are holding you back. And I think that's all stuff that I'm super interested in, as I've said. And I think there's so much value to at least peel back those first few layers. But also at the same time, I think sometimes there's not enough balance in that sort of conversation about, like, to what end, like what are we really trying to find, and could there be a cost, that once you get to a certain point, maybe it would have been better to keep that layer back on, or maybe something that people can resonate with as a pop culture reference, like the Matrix. I think most people have seen that, and it does pose this really interesting question about, if you could choose, if reality was this kind of existence in which it was mostly suffering, and humanity was reduced down to a very small population, and it was cold and dark, and just very heavy, but that was what was real. Or you could live a relatively normal life, and enjoying things, still having real relationships, still experiencing things, but a part of you would always know that it wasn't necessarily the base truth. And I think everyone has to face that question on some level or another in their lives. It's, do I do I want to dig deeper, or like, have I hit my point at which I feel like I've removed the most damaging and destructive and limiting layers. I've gotten past all the stuff that I really need to, and can I be satisfied with that, or do I continue downward? And I don't have an answer to that. I think everyone has to figure that out for themselves. But I think sometimes that aspect of that question doesn't quite get considered. That maybe there's an optimal layer that isn't at the core.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the word balance that you use, what comes to mind for me is just depending on where you are in your life, what kind of inner work you've been doing, as you were referencing, what effort to peel back the layers of who you are, who you think you are, what life is, what life isn't, what reality is, like all those things. Because I mean, it's a common thing within the psychedelic world, like, should everyone use psychedelics? Probably not. Like,
Hmm.
depends on where you are, because once you learn things, you experience things, or you see things, you can't unsee or unlearn or unexperience them. And I think that the Matrix example, or reference, is a great example of that, because it's just like, not everyone's ready to see beyond, where they are and what they think is real or not. And I think everyone has a unique path there. Like, again, I mean, my journey. I think what I've gone through at such a young age allowed me to be on, and I think everyone has these pivotal moments that allows you to question where you are in life. What is reality? What is my ego? What is my mind? The famous questions of, like, what happens after we die? What happened before we were born? Like,
Hmm.
all those things. And I think it's just It's a fascinating topic, and I think you'll get a huge array of perspectives, of course. But I think ultimately, if you can start with just, being aware of yourself and peeling that layer back, like, why do I think this about X, Y, and Z? Why do I
Hmm.
feel this way? Why do I do this? Why am I experiencing this? Why am I where I am today? And what can I do to change it? Going back to control, like we can control, at least a little bit, control like how we perceive ourselves in the world by just asking those questions. And
Hmm.
then meditation, and then floats, and then psychedelics, and then all these different types of things. It allows you to really look within. But then there comes the intention, like, why do you want to do that? Like, for
Hmm.
me, I have a very different perspective on why I'm doing all that than maybe John down the road. Maybe John down the road doesn't even want to look
Hmm.
beyond, what he sees every day, or she sees. And I think it's I don't know, I'm very biased to it because I think that it's important to
Hmm.
continue asking those questions about who am I? Really, like, who am I? Not like my name, where I come from, what do I do, but like, who am
Hmm.
I at my core? Which I know you and I have talked a lot about that, with just our own interests in self and then other people in our lives. And I honestly believe if people could just start with that first layer that you mentioned, like just
Hmm.
asking yourself, like, the reality I'm in right now, why is it this way, and what can I do to change it? Or is there aspects of it I want to change? Because I think
Hmm.
those types of questions will allow someone to be like, all right, well, here's a path where I can go deeper. Do I want
Hmm.
to? For what purpose do I want to? And I think
Right.
that people that rush into that, like, people, different people that use psychedelics, if they're not ready for what they're going to see, what do they call it with DMT? Unearned wisdom. Like, you
Hmm.
go into this experience and you see behind um, the filter of reality, you see what's going on beneath it. And I think that's another
Hmm.
interesting conversation. I'd love to get your take on it. Like, human beings right now listening, us having this conversation, we're perceiving reality based on our own autobiography, neurochemistry, biology, all those things. And then when we use a plant substance, whether it's psilocybin or DMT or cannabis or whatever, it
Hmm.
alters that. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, that alters the way our brains chemistry is, the way our brains working, what our eyes are seeing or not seeing. So then I always question, well, what is real?
Hmm.
Dreaming is real as we think it is and feel it is in the moment. And then
Hmm.
when we wake up, we kind of forget about it. We kind of just mesh back into this reality. But
Hmm.
then, like, movies like The Matrix or Inception,
Right.
I don't know if you've seen Inception, but
Yeah.
yeah, Jack and I just recently rewatched it again, and I was like, this movie makes so much sense to me now. Like, it just, I don't know, it's just super interesting. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but like what you were just saying just sparked all of these ideas. And
Hmm.
I guess the main point I'm trying to make is I think I've got this from psychedelics and looking up to or listening to thought leaders and reading the material in that world of plant medicine. One would call it psychedelics, plant medicine, same thing. Um, it's like, those experiences, are they real, or is it just in my mind? Or is this reality just made up in my mind? Or what about, like, you know what I mean? Like, what is the difference there? And I think that
Right.
that's where I'm super fascinating with, like, being faced with death many times in my life. I'm just like, I don't, I can confidently, consciously say I don't have a fear of death, but then I've been in those psychedelic moments where I'm like, oh, am I dying? Like, oh, this is okay. Like, it's good. But
Right.
I've literally flatlined. So I've gone from that to this deep interest in, like, what is life like outside of this human existence? And so I
Hmm.
don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm just curious to
Yeah.
see what you think about all
No,
that.
no, I got you, man. This is what I do. Uh, but yeah, no, I think it's a huge question. It's something that I ask myself all the time. And I think when I first became interested in psychedelics years ago, that was one of the first places that I went, just thinking about dreams and how, as you said, experientially, dreams are as real as anything else. Dreams are, we our five senses are firing in every way that we know them to be real. We're having a conscious experience, and unless you're having a lucid dream, to you it's real in that moment. And there's this super gray area between that and our waking lives, and it's not entirely clear why that happens, and we don't fully understand it. So similarly with psychedelics, I mean, we're starting to breach that whole just massive void right now with the research that they're doing with maps, and um, when they're studying psilocybin and MDMA, and treating people with treatment resistant depression or PTSD. And it's super exciting to see all this stuff happening now, as we're just starting to really understand what the brain looks like under these compounds, or what the brain looks like while someone's meditating, or how can a monk lay on a bed of nails, and like these sorts of questions. For a while we just had to kind of sit back and not understand, and now we're starting to get a little bit of insight, but it's so it's so abstract, and most of the knowledge we have is anecdotal and experiential. So it's, I mean, our limited understanding on some level, in a simplistic way, is that it's all it's really doing is reducing your brain's capacity to essentially form narrative, and to connect things. It's kind of removing your ability, which is arguably a very important ability, to fool yourself on a day-to-day basis and not be fully in touch, um, with what we might call base reality. And I guess that's what I was getting at before, like what is the core. And I guess, to keep the Matrix metaphor going, like that final scene, not the final scene, but kind of the climax of that film, is when he sees everything as ones and zeros, right? That he realizes that is kind of base reality to what he's experiencing. And so for a human, that could be something like being, miles down the road on an ayahuasca trip, and you're not able to even explain or understand what you're seeing, because at base we're just experiencing energy, and atoms, and in combustion, and things that we have no way of describing or relating to. And of course you couldn't live that way, you couldn't operate a life, you would not want to be that way all the time, of course. So on some level we have to ask the question, if that was what was base reality, um, how far do we actually want to be from that? Like, how far is optimal? And I think one way that I'm kind of putting together right now is almost like the goal is to find your optimal altitude. And I guess this maps in a few ways, as far as, like, getting higher and higher. But I think you want to find an altitude at which you can sustain. And I guess it's relevant to people who like climb Everest, or whatever. You have to adjust to certain altitudes, and you have to, if you just shoot right up to I don't know, 15,000 feet, you'll die, or at least it's not sustainable. But you could maybe go up to 30,000 feet for a few minutes, and you could see what it's like to be able to see our planet, this giant rock that we all live on, and see this incredible perspective, this bird's eye view that changes the way you think about everything. But still, at the end of the day, you have to fly back down to, you know, I don't know, maybe 10,000 feet max, to try to integrate that perspective. And you couldn't live up there. There's not any oxygen, and the earth is down there. That's where your people are, that's where your family is, that's where you live your life. Um so it's kind of this. And I guess the higher you go, the higher that altitude that you can sustain is, and that perspective that you can have on life and on reality. So you're kind of just bouncing back and forth. If this is something that you do regularly, you're able to go to some place, and you can kind of come back, and try to integrate it, and try to see how it relates. And but if you ever get to the point where you can't integrate it, well, then that's maybe where you need to take a step back, or you need to slow down, or you need to do some more of the very unsexy work on a day-to-day basis of exploring your mind in a sober state, and getting more in touch with reality as it is, and meditating, and going to therapy, or doing whatever you need to do to be able to integrate that kind of altitude, if you will. um, but whether or not that is reality versus what we're experiencing, I mean, there's really no answer there. I think reality, at least in the way that I understand it, is what it is and cannot be changed. But perception, I guess, is more so what we're talking about, and that's what's relevant to us. Is we are conscious beings having perceptive experience as humans, and we can't really step outside of that. We don't know what it's like to be any other life form on this planet. And sure, we can look at things from a scientific perspective, and we can study chemistry and physics, and we can describe things phenomenologically, but at the end of the day, it's not how we live our lives. And these are the tools that we have, these are the senses that we have. And so I think that's, I guess it's kind of a non-answer, because reality ultimately is, in the way that we tend to speak about it, subjective. But I think we can fundamentally change that by stepping outside of it for a moment, or better yet, maybe getting closer to what it really is, and being able to integrate that back into our day-to-day experience in a way that is actually helpful, as opposed to just being kind of destabilizing.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating topic about reality and consciousness, because it's like human beings decided over the time of their brains evolving to say what reality is, to give meaning to words, to create communication and language, and then for us to question, like, what is real? What is reality? What is not? But why is a
Mhm.
dream not real, but being awake is real? But then things like that. So it's always fascinating to me to have these conversations, because I just love asking people, like, well, what is reality to you? And it's funny just to see people's responses, because there's always like this pause, and they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. What is reality? And I know
Right.
that for me, I mean, my journey has led me to wanting to look into that and to ask those questions. And I'm curious, because I think this is a great place to like not take a hard pivot to this next point I want to talk about, but it actually fits in really nicely about vision and like your vision when you're younger. Like for me, like that was everything to me, and I've
Mm.
understood that the vision I held in my mind is what allowed me to be where I am today and overcome some of the things I've overcome. And then, hearing about that with like meditation and consciousness, and like we understand like the brain can create those same chemicals that we call emotions based on you seeing something in your mind or you actually experiencing it in your physical reality. And so I'm just curious, like I love asking people about vision, and like how important is vision to you in your life, and has that played a large role in your life, or maybe a newer role today?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's something I maybe have a somewhat, I guess, divergent from the and a perspective on, that's a little bit divergent from the norm. Or maybe it's not, maybe just divergent from you, to be honest. But I definitely say at a young age, I had some pretty fixed ideas. I think, as a lot of people do, about what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. Um, I guess, to give a brief explanation of that, at a young age, I was always very active physically. I was an athlete, not at any sort of a high level, but at a time it was a very important aspect of my life. And I started exercising really young, and I came from kind of a fitness family. My mom was a personal trainer, and kind of in that first wave of like aerobics instructors in the 80s and 70s and all that. So it was always a part of my life. I was always like kind of a little bit advanced physically at a young age. I hit puberty pretty young, and I think as that came along, I wanted to feed into that. I wanted to be a good athlete, um, and so I always worked really hard on that front. I was always considered to be a hard worker, someone to go the extra mile, and then I, over the years, started just like hitting setback after setback physically, injury after injury, and I had to essentially step away from the sport that I loved, because I, as you might be able to relate to, had too many head injuries. Um, and at that point, my focus kind of shifted. And though at the time I was in that space, and I was exercising a lot, and I was super interested in it, I was always researching, learning more. I just really, it was my thing. I was kind of known for it. It was a part of my identity. And then I take a step back and say, okay, what if I can't do this? Like, what if it can't be me who can who can accomplish all these things physically? How can I help others do that? And so for years and years, that was anybody who asked me, it was obvious what I was going to do with my life. I was going to work with athletes. I was going to be a trainer. I had a whole vision, a fucking business plan when I was like 14 years old. Of I got personal training certified when I was 16. Um, I started training the athletes at my high school, like my friends who were trying to play in college, just training them for free, working with them every day after school, off season, anytime, because I couldn't do it anymore. And that's what I would have been doing. And so I just dove totally in. I was planning on opening this facility for young athletes who are underprivileged, and kind of a community center of sorts, but also a way to sponsor these kids and train them and help them kind of make it to the next level. And like I said, that was like I really had this built out vision of what I wanted to do, and was taking all the right steps and doing all the right things for a long time. And then I went to college, and everything changed. I just I didn't see it coming, but at some point it just didn't resonate with me as much. And it's still something I think about to this day, because it's something that at a time was so much a part of who I was and what I wanted to do. And I think some of it was I started working. I started working as a personal trainer, and uh, it didn't quite go how I had planned or how I'd imagined. I'd been training people before that, kind of freelance, mostly friends, family, things of that nature. But then I went to a corporate gym, and I got a job when I was 18, as early as I could, and yeah, it really shook me. I really thought that it would be different, and I didn't realize how challenging it was to deal with everyday people, with regular goals and ambitions and problems, but also do that within a framework of a corporate business that was primarily just trying to get these people's money, and essentially trying to prey off their insecurities. Uh, and every single person that came into the gym that signed up, they had this like mandatory fitness assessment. So they would just like kick their asses. They would show them how out of shape they were, and then they would send them to me. And so I would get these people who were just kind of feeling kind of bad about themselves, not really even having wanted to pursue training or having any real goals with it per se, but just like wanting to improve, but also not really having the money for it. So at times they'd be throwing people at me who were like, they'd sign up for like one session per month, right? One session. So they were coming to me expecting me in one session per month to like seriously change their lives. And I built some relationships, and I really enjoyed it at times, but it was so frustrating to just like be receiving these people. I get them once a month, twice a month, and not even being able to like really impact what they were doing outside of the gym, and knowing that what I was doing was so fruitless. And it's kind of a long story, but ultimately that kind of pushed me away. And obviously that wasn't the environment for me, and I have no doubt that I could have thrived in a different space, right? If I had been able to go exactly where I wanted to, if I could have interned at a performance training center, straight out of college or something like that, like I'm sure I could have thrived in that space. But it did force me to have that pullback, um and just question everything, which was a little hard for me for a while, to say, man, I thought this was it, like this was what I was going to do. It was I thought it was going to be perfect, and it just wasn't. And that was like my first reality check to see like, okay, this isn't as easy as I thought. And these people aren't all my friends who are athletes, who are driven, and who have these ambitions. And I know exactly how to work with them. These are just everyday people who just maybe want to feel a little bit better, or drop a few pounds, who also aren't particularly driven, and who probably aren't going to do what you say when they're not there. And coming in touch with that just also made me reevaluate what it took to help an individual, to really make meaningful change for someone. It was going to take, of course, more than a session per month, but also maybe that wasn't even necessarily the right angle. That these people probably needed more than a decent personal trainer who had some good knowledge, and was a good motivator and a good speaker, to be able to achieve the sorts of things that they were wanting to achieve. So I had to take that step back, and ultimately I got into some very different things, and social entrepreneurship, and um, when I was in university, and just trying to find new ways to help people, and to help people accomplish what they want to accomplish, and feel better about themselves, and live more satisfied lives, outside of what I felt like was my comfort zone, or at the time I felt like I was meant to do. for whatever that's worth. So it's something that, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, it's something that's ever evolving, and here I am today having this conversation with you in a sense, as an expression of my desire to find a new way, a very distant way from that version of myself, but a way to help people, to relate to people, to use what I feel like I'm somewhat good at, or the unique value that I feel like I can provide to the world, to help people achieve different sorts of things, and maybe look at it more so in a holistic perspective, or more from a few layers deeper than just the skin deep, or just the physical, and um just get at it from a different angle that I think in time allows all those other goals to maybe be more feasible or reasonable, or maybe to reevaluate those other goals altogether.
Yeah, I love that. I think you and I are on the same page because that the reason I asked that is I'm always interested in people's um like vision, of course, but like what they started out like seeking in their life to at a young age to become something different when they're older, or being drawn towards, or like that question in school, like who do you want to be, or what do you want to do when you grow up,
Mm,
um and how that evolves. And I think the way you worded it was just so aligned with mine, because like my experience, because like I had this vision of becoming a professional athlete. Like that's all I did. It's all I like identified as, and I made that happen. And then through what I call multiple wake up calls in my life, I got to understand there's more to life than just that. And that's when I started the route of auditing who I was inside and out. How can I optimize my health inside and out? Then that led into the mindset, and the brain was at the forefront early on, but from a nutritional and health perspective, but not so much like a mental, emotional, like not so much cognitive, but just like the consciousness aspect, like the mental and emotional pieces of who we are.
mm,
And my vision just kind of stopped when I decided to step away from competition, 2017. I just didn't know what I was working towards, other than I wanted to help people. Cause that was like what I referred to as the third wake up call, was the third time I was diagnosed with more brain tumors. I was like, all right, there's something more to my life than just riding my bike. Like this is self-driven. I know my parents are proud of me. I know I've, inspired some other people on the way, but like, I think I know there's something more to be done with my life than just ride my bike. People don't care.
mm,
The really what started generating like a following of people that interested in me was the fact that I kept getting up and trying again. And I was like, all
mm,
right, so if people are interested in me in this way, and I've been learning all these things to help optimize my health, now people are asking, like, let me do something to pursue that. And that's when I started, my health coaching business years ago. And then I went through this like 3-year period, I'd say, of just like this imposter syndrome, this identity crisis. I was like 28 years old, but I was like, who the fuck am I now? Like
mm,
I spent so much of my, like over half my life identifying as this person. And then I paid my bills from a 16-year-old up until, I was 28, 29. And now I just stopped all that. And I never took time to think about what's after, because I was so against plan B, always have a
mm,
backup plan. I was like, no, fuck that. Like, and then now I'm in this position where I'm making momentum. Like I'm supporting myself from not riding my bike, but helping people improve their health and their life. But I just couldn't bring up a vision that I was working towards. Like I had the purpose. My purpose, I feel today, still is to help empower people. I learned that the hard way, and I learned that we have a lot of things that are in our small amount of control that we can improve ourselves and improve our health. And I just was like, man, like I don't know what I can't see it in my mind. Like I can't picture what the future is that I'm working towards. And that left me feeling somewhat depressed, a lot of fear and anxiety, and just
mm,
kind of lost. And I was like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't feel that same drive every day. Like my buddy Jimmy,
mm,
he talks about it. He has his platform called Be a Pro. Pro stands for prepared, reliable, obsessed. He's like, there's a level of obsession with certain high performers that you see that get to a level of success. Like, and I was like, yeah, I had that when I was riding. Like every day I wanted to ride. I was watching videos. I was just looking at, I was reading any article I could and just learning about these products of the different bike parts and all this and that. Like I was
mm,
obsessed. And then when I took a step away from it and I didn't have that vision I was working towards, I was like, I don't really know. Like, I mean, I feel like I should be doing this, but I'm not like that inspired or that motivated to do it. And, you know, the reason why I ask about vision is because it's obviously it's really close to I'd say my health today, my life today, because when I was going through the first diagnosis and that surgery, all I kept focusing on was what I wanted to do when I woke up. And thankfully, I had something I was super passionate about at a young age that allowed me to paint that picture in my mind. And I feel like if it wasn't for that, I could have easily fallen into the like, oh, like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to wake up, you know, like, I'm, you know, I got a fucking brain tumor. Like, this sucks, you know, but like, I was just like, fuck that. I'm going to continue living because I had this thing driving that. And I don't believe that people have to like try to make a career out of a passion, but I do think it's super important that people have something that they're passionate about on that level. Maybe not that exact level of obsession, but like that passionate level that keeps them wanting to do it more, because it's essentially, for me, it was something to live for. And I was like, all right, this is worth living for. And it helped me. Animals making a ton of noise. I don't know if you can hear it, but
No, you're good.
it helped me overcome that obstacle. And so my understanding now with like meditation and visualization, it elicits the same chemical reactions in the body. Those emotions are going to heavily influence how we behave on a day-to-day basis. And that's ultimately going to create a different reality, a different experience than our subjective reality. So it sounds like you and I have had a similar, and I'm actually curious, what was the sport you were playing when you were younger?
I was a little basketball player.
Basketball player. Awesome.
Yeah,
I started
I
with
didn't
basketball as
grow. I
well.
did not grow,
Yeah.
but
No,
at
I
a
did
time,
better.
I was quite tall. I just stopped young.
Oh, that's awesome. Their basketball is my original, you know, I was like 13 when I was like, I want to go to the NBA one day. I want to go to UNC because Michael Jordan went there.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 14, I realized that I was better at riding a bike and I was really short for the NBA. So I think it worked out well. But that's funny that we both have that in common, because I didn't know that you played basketball when you're younger. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, that was my shit for a long time. Weirdly how I got all of my concussions, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I'll have to
Um,
pick your brain about that sometime, because I'm very fascinated by concussions in basketball. But
yeah.
I want to go back to the point you were making though, when you were like, all right, well, if I can't do this, I'm going to help people do it in a better manner. I'm going to help them, you know, improve their efforts and their skill. And then you went to school or to college, and then things kind of shifted with that experience you had at 18 with a job. And so it sounds like the vision kind of shifted, or just kind of like the vision you were working towards just kind of faded away. I don't know if that sounds bad. Like, maybe not.
No, I mean, I think it was a little bit of a bubble that I had, and it got popped. Like, I mean, that's life. That I had these ideas of what it was going to be like, and I think most people experience that on some level, especially if they go to college, or you know, once they move out into the real world in whatever extent that they do. That I think everyone has ideas, because that's what society generally promotes is to have an idea of what you want to be, what you want to do, and it's usually your first try is usually pretty wrong from what, at least from what I've heard from others, is that you think you, but you don't even know yourself that well at that age, and so you experience it for the first time and you're like, man, maybe it's not really for me, or you just become in touch with all these other realities that change the way that you think about it. But I think fundamentally, in a way, it's not all that different. And I think it illuminates a point that I feel like is very important, and I feel like I've heard you speak to before on previous episodes, that at the end of the day, it's often this journey for individuals of just finding how they are uniquely valuable, right? And that's not always clear, because sure, some people are really gifted in very specific areas, like you're in the highest percentile in math, or you know, you're gifted in music or whatever, and that just like comes forth and it's obvious and it's almost undeniable. But for a lot of people who it's maybe a little more abstract, or they're maybe more a jack of all trades, it seems like, or their skills aren't as directly transmittable to like an obvious money making career, that it's obviously a very hard question for the average individual to figure out, like what is something where my skills are really going to be best used. And so I think at the end of the day, most people do want to have a kind of a purpose driven life. They want to do something that feels meaningful and that helps other people to some extent, that is driving the world in the direction that they think it ought to go. But how you do that is obviously the hard part. And if you could just snap your fingers and yeah, have the perfect job that satisfied everything for you, I think most people would do that. But it it becomes this much more complicated journey of figuring out what your lane really is, and how you can express yourself and in a way that can resonate with others, in a way that other people can't, that your unique combination of skills and experiences and perspectives, uh, how that can be best leveraged towards helping yourself from a financial and very literal perspective, but also others. And I don't think I'm by any means there, to be clear. Like I think it's something that I think about every day, and I've got lots of ideas and ambitions and things that I think might be worth doing. But at the same time, it's not like I feel totally fulfilled with my job or my career, and I really enjoy this project that I've been working on, and lots of these other independent things, but I haven't found the way to really marry those two things so that it can become a career, or that the passion that I can bring to life is what I'm spending most of my time with. And I think everybody faces that challenge. But at the same time, I think sometimes our society puts too much pressure on individuals to like find the perfect fit, that it's going to be like this puzzle piece, and anything outside of that is just going to have to be like totally dissatisfying. And as you said, not everyone even needs to have a career, right? It's totally fine to have a job, and to pursue your passions, and pursue joy in life in other ways besides how you pay the bills, or take care of your family. And I think sometimes having that expectation that those things will perfectly marry up sometimes leaves people feeling like there's this void in their life that doesn't necessarily have to be there. And sure, I think in an ideal world, everybody would have their own business, and it would be perfectly curated to their skills. And I think that's a little bit utopian, but I think it would be awesome. But I don't think that we're there. And I think one thing that was so valuable to me that I want to share before I forget, because I think maybe 4 or so years ago, I was maybe closer to 3 or 4. I was in a time of my life where I had no vision, I would say. I was kind of in between things, and I wasn't even really particularly interested in what I do now for a living. Um, and I had experimented with some different writing projects, with some different creative work that hadn't quite panned out how I wanted it to. I was very much in this kind of limbo state where I wasn't sure what I wanted. Um, I was in a great relationship, and that brought a lot of value to my life, and gave a lot of perspective to my life. But at the same time, I just really didn't know what the fuck I was going to do with myself. And I didn't really know what I wanted, or what I felt like my purpose was. And one of the most helpful things I ever was exposed to was, um, regardless of maybe some of the controversy that, for whatever reason, swirls around how he's portrayed by the media, which I think is somewhat inaccurate, but that's beside the point. Jordan Peterson's 10 Rules for Life was a book that I read at a pretty crucial point in my life where, like I said, I didn't have much of a vision. I didn't really know what I was working towards, and I was just kind of working a job to pay the bills, and just trying to grind and make as much side money as I can, and that sort of thing. But I was spinning my wheels, and one principle that he puts forward is just that even when you don't feel like there's some sort of overarching vision or purpose to your life, you can always be deeply motivated by being in touch with what the worst version of yourself actually is. And I know that sounds a little bit dark, but and it maybe relates to something we'll get into a little more later in regards to the shadow. He's a big follower of Jung's work, and a lot of his psychological theory that is kind of similar. It's a similar metaphor as far as um, that dark side of every individual that exists, that you have to be in relationship with. But going through the exercise of just thinking about like, what does my life look like if I just gave into everything, right? If I just gave into all of the negative impulses and all of the urges, all the like, what is that? What does rock bottom really look like for me as an individual, knowing who I am? And I think we sometimes forget that living on a day-to-day basis is a struggle and is to some extent remaining in conversation with that option. It's always on the table. You could always give up. You could always just give in. And coming from a situation growing up where I had a father with a lot of self-destructive tendencies. Um, and I had some relationships in my life that were pretty complicated on that front. And I saw an individual that I cared about and loved deeply. I saw it time and time again happen. I saw him being the worst version of himself over and over and over again. And I was honestly, I maybe we'll get into this word, but I was so lucky that that really didn't hit me that hard. And it's something I talk about all the time with my wife, but something insulated me from that. And I feel like I was able to escape some of those experiences as a kid that maybe to a lot would seem traumatic. That I was able to somehow kind of tune them out, and not remain super invested in that relationship past a point that would be unhelpful to me. And I'm talking about me as a child. Like, this isn't even me as a relatively mature adult who was really making decisions on this level. I just was able to make it through, and then eventually at an older age reflect on it and learned a lot from it. But all that to say, being in that environment growing up where I saw those decisions being made over and over again, and I saw exactly how it pans out. And not that this applies to everyone, but I think there is a specific way in which men spiral down in life that is that is consistent, and that maps onto a lot of people's experience. When they start to give up on things, and they fall down, they fall into certain habits, and they fall into certain tendencies and urges, or whatever you want to call it. And for me, to get back to the actual point of Peterson's example, that I knew what that looked like for me in a very vivid way, because I saw it in my dad all the time, and I was always really afraid on some level that even though I felt so distant from it, that there was a part of me that was absolutely that. And that was something I could not divorce from myself, right? That is very literally genetically a part of me on some level. And you could argue maybe that because I saw it, I'll never do it, but that's also what everyone says, right? There's this understanding that most men or women in the same vein, have this fear of making the same mistakes that their father did. It's this archetype. But um, yeah, just being able to really pressure that aspect of myself, and say, really build that out based on where my life was at that time, and say, what would it really look like if I took that path, if I really let things slip, if I really threw my hands up in the air, and I wasn't coming to life every single day with a certain, attitude and intention and drive and awareness and mindfulness and all these other things that I struggle with, but I still continue to show up for. If I didn't have those things, I was, prompted to really explore that aspect of myself and acknowledge it, and be okay with it, and to know, like, hey, every day where I'm doing everything that I need to, I'm being responsible, I'm remaining in conversation with the dark side of myself, and not pretending like it's not there, and saying, hey, even if I don't feel like my life has a perfect vision or purpose right now, there is so much value and meaning in not choosing that, and showing up every single day, and giving yourself some credit for doing that. And I think it was something that was really important for me to kind of start building up a sense of meaning in my life, that every day I was moving away from that side of myself. I was having a better relationship with that side of myself, and building habits and a framework in my life around my inner identity of sorts, so that I knew that when things went wrong in life and when I was faced with difficulties and challenges, which is where these downward spirals seem to begin, I'd be prepared to be able to handle those challenges in stride. And they've certainly come. And I'm certainly glad that I had that opportunity to take a step back and really have that conversation with myself. And so, all that to say, I feel like for a long time that has been a big part of my kind of meaning and vision in life is having a relationship with that shadow, if you will, and then also saying, okay, how can that inform what I actually do want?
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point. I know I sent you this morning a clip to one of the YouTubers I watched that breaks down like hip hop
Hmm.
lyrics, and then he's been doing rock here and there from his Patreon fans, and he did Tool's 46 and 2
Yeah.
song about the shadow, and that song and like those other YouTube breakdowns of that song have been sent to me a couple times in the last few months. And then I saw it pop up this morning on his channel, and I was like, oh man, like this is gonna be awesome for when Brandon and I talk. I don't know if you watched it or not, but I mean,
No, I did.
yeah, it's super fascinating, especially to see someone like him that's so removed from that, and then like take the
Right.
time and to educate himself on
Hmm.
what the shadow and all these other things are. And I think it's such a great point too, because that can be such a driving motivator, like you said, to think of like the worst possible scenario for your life, for yourself. And I actually had a friend and mentor of mine that told me that the other week. He's like, man, like think about like this or a couple of months ago actually now, think about this vision, like this goal, like I want to hear like this biggest goal you have, like if no money, if anything weren't or yeah, if money or anything of that wasn't an issue, like what would you want to do? And I struggled for a minute because I was like, oh, that's an interesting thought, because I'm usually in this
Hmm.
realm of like lack of resources to do something, so we tend to think
Hmm.
equal to our environment. And here I am with like a potential limitless environment in this
Hmm.
hypothetical form, and I can't think outside of this box. And I struggled, and I finally broke through. And it's an interesting paradigm to be in. And back to your point about because that's where I was going with that. He was like, the worst case scenario, you come live in my basement, which is a furnished downstairs essentially of my house. Like you'll be
Hmm.
good. Like you're gonna be fine. Like put all your time and energy into making this happen. And worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, you have me and other people that will gladly help you out. And I was like, oh,
Hmm.
that's it. Like that's got to be such an interesting. And I think that's an interesting thought for people to ponder. And so many people don't have the ability to do that because they're always in survival mode. Not enough money coming in, or not enough opportunity, or they're struggling or whatever. And it's like you can never, if you're stuck in stress survival mode, you can never think greater than that, because that's your reality. And that's why I
Hmm.
think vision is so important. And it doesn't need to be this grand vision to like be a superhero or a famous person. It's just like, what do you want? And
Hmm.
oftentimes, most of the time, it starts with what you don't want. And like you said, what's the worst possible version of yourself? What's the worst case scenario? What is it, everything that you don't enjoy about your life now? Let's start there. And then we can easily reframe that into a positive. So it's like,
Hmm.
if you don't want to be unhealthy, you want to be a healthy person. So let's paint that picture. Like, let's create that vision of what that life's like. And with purpose, man, like so many people over the years have just asked me, like, how did you find your passion? How did you find your purpose? Back to the word luck. I got lucky. I found something I was extremely passionate about at a 13-year-old young age that
Hmm.
consumed me. I did everything bare minimum just to be able to have as much time on my bike as
Hmm.
possible. That led me to a very interesting experience that not many people will ever experience in their life. And because of that, it saved my life for many different, things that we don't have enough time to chat about, like those life learning lessons from that,
Right.
figuratively and literally. But it led me to finding my true purpose, as I believe it is now, that is larger than riding my bike. And so when people ask me, how do I find my purpose in life? Well, do shit, try stuff, stop
Hmm.
playing it safe and doing what society tells you to do. And yeah, that's going to come down to your environment, depending on your age. Are you on your own, or you have family? Like, do they support you? There's so many pieces of that puzzle. And I think I got very lucky that I had supportive parents um, that supported me. But the thing that you and I always talk about with luck is I believe in luck, But when it comes to someone's success, I have a hard time putting all of my eggs in that basket of like that person got lucky.
Mhm.
Like if anyone knows Akron, Ohio, and like learning that LeBron comes from that town, like to say he got lucky, no, yeah, maybe he was born lucky into his genetic profile of a human being, but he had to
Mhm.
work at it.
Right.
And so I'm getting a little off tangent, but some of the things I wanted to draw back to that you said were so important is when someone says, well, I don't know what my purpose is. And I'm like, oh, go try some stuff. Cool. But for now, your purpose could be to become the best possible version of yourself, which maybe starts with thinking of what the worst possible version of
Right.
yourself is, and allow that to drive you forward, because by doing so, you have a direct and indirect relationship with every human being and the planet and everything involved on it by the way you show up in life. What is that movie? The Butterfly Effect. Like you change one thing, everything else changes. If you show up and you run into this person one day and you're in a good mood, maybe that could change their mood, or you just say hi. But if you were in a negative mood, you're pissed off and you miss
Mhm.
the hold the door open for someone, or just you cut someone off because you weren't paying attention, like that could mess up their day. It's like this whole ripple effect. And so the final thing I wanted to point out that you mentioned was like this idea that we have to audit what we want to do in our lives based on the monetary value of it. And I've been in positions and relationships when I was younger that were like challenging me to leave the dream I was living because I wasn't making enough money for their liking, and I
Mhm.
wasn't planning forward enough, and I wasn't gonna be able to support them and this and that. And
Mhm.
I got depressed about it, and I almost gave up living my dream, not chasing my dream, but living it. And I
Mhm.
think it's such a sad thing that we as a society have created this, you got to do something valuable in terms of money, because so many people have so many passions, skills, talents, and value as just who they are, that I would argue if they just pursued it, the money would come. And that's one
Mhm.
of the biggest things I've learned from people that are successful on that front of money, finances. Is that like, whether it's business or this or that, if the focus is money, yeah, maybe you'll get it, but maybe you'll lose it. Maybe you won't get it. Maybe you'll sacrifice your health in your experience
Mhm.
as a human being to get it. But when you focus on, impact, you focus on living your best life, whatever that means to you, and doing the things you enjoy, the money will come. Money is just a positive consequence of energy exchange that we happen to use as paying for things in this world. And so that was a lot of what I could remember of what you were saying, because you
Mhm.
said so many valuable things. And I love that you put it. It's like, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have that vivid vision, it doesn't need to be something extravagant. It could just simply be, what do you not enjoy? And what is that vision of life for you that you do enjoy? But maybe start with, what's the worst possible scenario? What's the worst case scenario if you don't make it? Or what's the worst case scenario of you being your worst self, starting
Mhm.
there and then just flipping it. It's simple, it's challenging. But I think if like people could start there, like that's what was helpful for me, especially when I was leaving my dream. And then like, oh, I found my purpose, but I don't know what that looks like moving forward. I'm just doing this. And I just felt lost. And it
Right.
wasn't until I started building up, okay, what's the life that I want to have? How do I want to think in that life? How do I want to feel? Who do I want to be with? What are the experiences I want? And now I'm finding it just comical that like these are the moments that I'm like finding myself in. I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to be doing. We started this at 5 o'clock. I had a client call at like 1:30 to 2:30. And then I just did my thing. And then now we're doing this. And like I get to pay my bills by doing exactly what I want and start that way. But yeah, bringing that all back, I think moving forward with this conversation, you have an interesting perspective on luck that it challenges my projection of that word. And I
Mhm.
think that I've been becoming more and more clear of what I mean when I say I don't believe in luck in
Mhm.
certain contexts, but clearly I do believe in luck in other contexts. So
Right.
let's go there. Let's talk about luck. Let's talk about choices. Let's talk about free will. Is there free will? Is there such thing as luck? Like what? I know it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
feel free to go wherever you want with that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think it's important to, at least a significant part of any of my perspectives, anything I've shared today, anything I will share, is that I tend to resist absolutes in all forms. And I think it's a helpful principle to have. Obviously, it's something that I hold. So in my subjective way, think that it is helpful. But um, so I think, to your point when you brought it up previously, I think anytime anyone says that something is any sort of outcome is purely based in luck, I think that's just an unhelpful thing to say. I think to say that anything is purely based in anything is probably always going to be inaccurate. Um, so I think when people tend to, say things like that, there's a very reasonable degree of resistance to be there, because I think part of where my stance on luck and choices comes from is that I think we generally do a pretty poor job, or just have a limited capacity to understand exactly why things work out the way that they do, because life is so complicated and multivariate. And why I like cilantro, and my wife thinks it's disgusting, is something that is hard for me to speak to. And sure, we could look at various genes that might play a role, but it's pretty low fidelity stuff. And that's a very simple example, but that's one thing that you would think is pretty straightforward. So when you look at something like, okay, why did this individual succeed in life, if we're trying to pin that down in any way, we're going to be missing the mark to a high degree regardless. And we can try to pull out things, we can try to pull out principles and say, okay, this was something that was helpful. And of course, luck is always going to be a variable, right? I mean, genetics are a huge part of who we are. And I think, of course, there's a lot of play there, but I think most people can agree that there's some combination of nature and nurture that impacts who we become as individuals. And how much you think, whether you think it's 50-50, or you think it's 70-30, or whatever, um obviously nature is luck, right? I mean, what you are born with, you have no say in that. And so even if you think that that's a smaller portion than some, it's still a big one. And so obviously luck plays a role in everything to some degree. Some things are more obvious than others, like uh, we can even talk about very simple things to make it relevant, maybe even that apply to you. Whatever genetic predisposition you had, given all the experiences you've had with brain cancer and all of that, that obviously was not something that you could have controlled. And in a lot of ways, even though, to be fair, I don't know a ton of details about it, I don't think anyone could sit there and be like, Josh, it was your fault that these brain tumors came around. Um, of course, you could say a lot of how you dealt with that situation and where you are today uh, has to do with the choices that you've made as an individual. Absolutely. Um, but at the same time, I think, and we've talked a lot about layers today, which I think it was a helpful preamble to this. I think when we start to peel the layers back on something like choices, or some things like choices, uh, that's where it starts to get a little bit blurry, where it's like, do we really understand why we make the choices that we make? And I know I've introduced you to Sam Harris and some of his work, and he does a lot on free will, which certainly has affected my opinions on this topic quite a bit. But
I
he
will say that's definitely challenged a lot of my former beliefs and understandings to think differently. So some beliefs I still hold, but in a different light, to where I say now, I understand why I used to defend my success by it's not fucking luck, because people
Mhm,
would just say, oh, you're lucky because you're there, and not seeing what I did along the way. And then I'm like, oh, so I disagree with, like you said, an absolute. My success has nothing to do with just luck, it has to do with a
mhm,
lot of things. So yeah, Sam Harris is definitely someone that I love that you've
mhm,
introduced me to, because it's been able to help me challenge the way I see things, which is another great, I think, choice that we have if we become
mhm,
aware of it, is to audit our beliefs, our opinions, and see what else is out there, rather than just
mhm.
being like dogmatic about it, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and I guess, just to continue that, he puts forward a helpful example that I would refer anyone to if I could, which is, and I won't spell it out completely, but it gives the individual an opportunity to, in kind of a meditative state, observe what it's like to make a choice, and to just undergo something very arbitrary. I think he uses just think of a movie, but you could use anything on that front. And to really just observe from as aware of a perspective as you can, what happens from a conscious perspective as you make a decision, as a choice comes up, what it's like to just have something appear in your mind, just like our thoughts just arise on a day-to-day basis. And much of meditation is being able to observe that and just be aware of that and not identify with that. Um, but it really does illuminate the fact that a lot of what goes on in our minds is totally mysterious to us, in that though you could take an individual's choices and you could view them from the outside, and you could make a value judgment on what they're doing, you don't really understand why they're doing it or what's going on the inside. And on some level, neither do they, right? Like a lot of times we just make decisions, and even though we could say they're the right decisions to for certain outcomes or the wrong decisions, the individual is somewhat detached from the true explanation as to why they did that. And you could to some degree argue that that's where luck starts to creep back in, where how much of this is genetic disposition, how much of this is prior experience, how much of this is childhood trauma, why did you recoil, why did you respond that way, all of these things. And of course I kind of led with the point that it of course it's multivariate, and it's not like we're digging and we're digging and we're digging and there's just like this obvious core at the center of everything. It's more like a pie. It's a cornucopia. It's all these things that contribute to every single decision that we make. And obviously genetics and environmental factors and lots of things that are totally outside of our control contribute all the time in ways that we don't understand. And so I think sometimes the way in which I speak about luck that maybe diverges from your opinion a little, which is totally fine, is that I more take it from a perspective of I don't feel like I understand why I'm where I am. I've learned a lot in my life, and I feel like I have a lot of insights to gain from that. But why I was able to make the right decisions versus the wrong decisions at some points in my life, uh, I feel like we're pretty reliably bad at figuring that out. And I think often we are able to tell ourselves a story in retrospect because that's what we're super good at. Our, the left side of our brain is incredible to craft a narrative around everything. So we see certain outcomes and we say, "Oh, okay, so that was because this happened to me when I was a kid, or that was I did that because somebody pissed me off early today, or I did that because my dad's that way." And we go with the narrative that protects us the most, or that maybe makes the most sense to us in the moment. But once again, I don't think anything's that simple. And so I think sometimes when I look at things that I feel positive about in my life, i I attach luck to that because I acknowledge the mystery of it. I acknowledge that I don't really know why or how or what led into me meeting my wife, or us connecting in the way that we did, or us being here. So I just consider myself lucky to have met her. Um, of course, what is sustainable about our relationship, the day-to-day work that we do to stay together and to always choose each other, is something a little bit different. But at the same time, either way, I just have a certain gratitude for that, despite the fact that I understand maybe a sliver of why it is really the case. So just to clarify that, in a little bit more of a succinct way, I think much of my relationship to luck, and why I use luck a lot, maybe more than people feel like is necessary. I tend to say, "Oh, I'm just very lucky that this happened," even as I did earlier when I talked about what happened to me when I was a kid. Like I had kind of a weird childhood that had some very difficult experiences to it. But to be honest, I don't feel traumatized in any way. I don't feel like I carry that. And in that regard, I feel kind of lucky because I can't explain it. And I don't feel like I was like the author of my response to those situations as a child. I'm not going to take ownership of that. I'm not going to give myself credit, but I'm also not going to beat myself up for the stuff that I didn't do right. And I feel like that's why it's so important, and why, having a sort of conversation about free will and luck, where it goes is it totally debases any sort of perspective that comes from a place of true judgment or hatred or idolization of anyone, right? Because it doesn't, it limits the ego, and it stops me from ever really saying like, man, that's all me. Like I'm going to take full credit for that achievement because I did the fucking work. um but at the same time, it stops you from ever being like, dude, you're a piece of shit. Like, who you are at your core, that decision that you made, who you are solely responsible for, there's no other explanations there, and it's about who you are as a person, why that went that way. So and obviously that maps onto others in the world as well. When I talk about hatred and judgment, it makes no sense to hate anyone, to judge anyone in a real way, once you maybe peel a few of those layers back and say, I don't really know why they did that. I don't like what they did. It hurt me. And we still want to promote the right sorts of behavior. And I think it's important to make sure that this doesn't get disguised as like an argument that, no one can be held responsible for their actions, because that's absolutely not the case. And it certainly isn't meant to rob anyone of autonomy in their lives or demotivate people or make them feel apathetic. It's just to recognize that we don't really understand things as well as we think we do, and that we're all just kind of these super complex, mysterious physical systems that in this moment we just are who we are. Like, I'm Brandon, you're Josh, and we're bringing everything that we have experienced and are genetically to the table right now. And we couldn't be anything different. This conversation, if we could just rewind, it would probably go the same way again. But if we changed something in our physical systems, if we introduced a new variable to this environment, if we added a new stimuli, if we added a new resource, you shared a new piece of information with me, now the conversation can be different. We're different people after that. So I just wanted to throw that in to make sure people understand that it's because I think people sometimes get very triggered, if you will, by talking about luck and free will in these ways, because I think it's very important for people to feel like they have free will in the more conventional sense. But at the same time, it's more so, it's not really about that. It's about saying that often we actually are doing the best that we can with our circumstances. And you can argue that we have a responsibility to make changes to our environment, into our systems, and to expose ourselves to new things so that we can change, because we have this plasticity. But it allows you to look back in the past and say, man, that was just who I was. Like, that was who I was at that time, and I wouldn't have done it again if I could go back, but you can't. And at any given moment, you just want to continue to move forward and allow this physical system, this very complex thing that you don't fully understand, to just be in a better and better situation, to have more information to assess, to be in a better environment, so that you can make better decisions and choices going forward. But you don't necessarily have to keep yourself or anyone else on the hook for things that they've done in the past.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually really like that, and I shouldn't say I really like that. And and for me, that just brought up a bunch of new thoughts and looking at things, because like the whole Sam Harris, like there is no free will, there is no choices that are free will choices. Cause I think of that because it's like, all right, he like the example, like don't think of a pink elephant and you're gonna think of a pink elephant. And it's like you just can't help because you just process that information. It's like, all right, cool. So it's like with choices, and I think he uses example. It's like you're choosing to walk down the sidewalk, and for some reason, some person wants to drive their car over the sidewalk and you jump out of the way. Did you choose that, or did you react to someone else? And therefore, is there free will? Like, is there choice? And I think with how you just described all that, and then bringing it back to luck and to choices and to outcomes and to responsibility and blame and fault and all those things, I think tying this into identity from my understanding of my past, my reflection of my past, and how that correlates to where I am now, and the emotions and the thought processes and the experiences and the reality externally, I think, and this is the new thought that from what you just shared, I think I formed this identity that I would rather look at my life as I am responsible for the creation of it now and moving forward, because I am an adult. I can't change the past. I'm not responsible for the things that happened to me. I'm not to blame for the things that happened to me in the past, especially as a child. And I love this quote, like, we're only always doing our best at the time with the resources we have, whether that be
Mhm.
thoughts, information, skills, time, money, people, whatever it is. And so I think it's fascinating because I'm always like, now I'm always in the mindset of like, yeah, this is my belief. And then I'm like, all right, well, what's the argument against that belief? Like, I love the fact that, like, choices, like, I love choices. Like, I'm very big proponent of like you said, it's not all just one thing or another. Like, some things are lucky, some things aren't. Some things have to do with choices and discipline and effort and taking an action initially. But then I'm like, all right, well, did something influence me to think consciously I'm going to make this
Right.
choice? Or did I just genuinely, just out of the blue, this is my spirit that is telling me like I want to make this choice? Or was
Mhm.
that predetermined before I became a human being? Jack and I just watched the Disney movie Soul. Have you seen that?
Oh, gotcha. No, I haven't had the chance yet, but I've heard good things.
It's fascinating. I think it's like a more I worded it yesterday, a long anticipated sequel to the Disney movie Inside Out. Have you seen that one?
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I love that movie.
Yeah, I think it's just like the next step. It's just super fascinating. I think you'll enjoy it. But I think of bringing this all back to identity, which is something I want to pick your brain about too, because I think identity is a huge piece of this conversation. People, like, in general, like, whether they acknowledge it or not. But I think, back to my idea that I formed from what you were saying, is like, I think I've formed this identity to think that I do have a little bit of control in creating creating something similar to the vision I have for my future based upon my beliefs of choices, things that happen that are lucky. But I like to look at as luck as like taking action and being in the right place at the right time based upon my choices, my perspectives, and the values I have. And ultimately that vision I'm working towards, because I think it starts with like, what is it you want your life to look like now, tomorrow, a year from now? What can you do to increase the probability of that event? Because I don't believe we have control and outcomes, but I believe we have the control in this moment to be, thinking of things like that, painting that picture of what we want to experience, and then what can we do to be congruent with how we're showing up to live that life. And I really believe that having that vision, as simple as it could be, like, I want to, do X or experience this. Okay, cool. Then reverse engineering, like, what is it you need to change about your life? What choices can you make? I believe that by doing that, we increase the probability of that experience becoming true, and we decrease the amount of time before it happens. Which one could say, if you just sat on your couch every day and meditated, you could get lucky with the thing you're meditating for to happen one
Mhm.
day. But one also could argue, well, if you don't do anything about it, you just meditate. Like, if all you were to do is sit there and meditate every day and not do anything, what are the chances that it's going to happen?
Mhm.
It's going to be slim. I mean, impossible. It could happen. And that's just what I think that came from what you explaining, that and like free will and all that. It's like, oh, I've formed an identity to believe in being empowered by believing I have some little control over who I am and how I react. But then again, I don't, because it's reacting to my environment and everything in it. But that I
Mhm.
like to believe that I still have a choice to create something that I'm seeing in my mind. And I think that's, like I said, Dr. Martin Luther King, he had a dream,
Right.
fucking did everything he could to make that happen.
Yeah.
Gandhi, another example. There was nothing in their environment affirming that that would come true, and it
Mhm.
did. So bringing that to identity, like, what are your thoughts on identity? And I mean, if you want to speak to anything I just said, for sure, do so. But I think that moving into identity is an interesting piece, because that was that epiphany I just had. It's like, oh, I've formed this identity to believe in these things and to challenge them at the same time, but choose to believe in them more so, because that makes me feel better about my efforts and my momentum moving forward.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think I'm glad you mentioned. I think an important word in this conversation that I hadn't brought up yet, which is probability. And I think thinking probabilistically is something that I wasn't as I wasn't as used to doing for a while. And I've always been someone who is a pretty analytical thinker, and I usually try to, rest my ideas in science and in reason and logic. And I think one of the ways that it was spelled out for me that really helped is even thinking about life as it maps onto the game of poker, and how in poker it's you could say it's a game of luck, but it's not really, right? I mean, the best players in the world are there for a reason, and you or I couldn't just show up to a table and beat these guys, but we could certainly beat them in one hand, and that would be luck. So it's luck is a plays a huge role in this game of poker, but in the long term it does not, right? And in the long term, the better players will come out on top because they are incredible probabilistic thinkers, and they understand that in time, even if they just have, a 51-49 edge, you play enough hands and they will end up with more money every single time. So it's in life for individuals. I feel like maybe the most empowering thing, the empowering message you can offer is getting individuals to increase the probability that they will achieve certain outcomes, even though you might lose and you might be the best player at the table, but you could lose. And there's nothing that you could have done any better. You could play your hand perfectly. You could do all the math. You could understand all the probabilities on the table. You could make the perfect bet. You could read everyone at the table perfectly, and you could just lose the hand because they had better cards than you did. And so I feel like it's such a helpful metaphor for life, because that is how it happens. You can do all the work. You can prepare in every way imaginable. You can play that game a million times and be totally ready for it. But sometimes there is that dimension of luck. Things just happen, and then we live in a chaotic universe. So but if you are able to think probabilistically and make decisions more in touch with that side of life, and understanding that, okay, this is how I increase my chances of winning here, this is how I play long-term games, and how I don't get fixated on short-term outcomes, where for the individual they could, you're like I said, one of us could show up to, we could go to Vegas right now, we could go to a high stakes table, we could put all the money we have down, and we could win. We could sit there and win six figures easy. And we could walk away from that table and say, I'm a damn good fucking poker player, right? And we've got evidence right there on the table that we just beat all these pros who know exactly what they're doing. And it could be pure luck, right? It could be pure luck that we won that hand, and everybody else at the table could be sitting around like, that motherfucker got so lucky, and everybody knows it because they know the probabilities, and it was 99-1, but that one happens. And I feel like that's often on either side of it how we live life, that our successes, we don't audit them, we only audit our failures. And so when someone loses a hand, they say, ah, fuck, and they think about it over and over again. They're like, what did I do wrong? Should I bet more? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? And when we think in every way possible about how we could have changed that. It's the same thing. Actually, Dr. Peter Attia, he had a conversation with a professional poker player that I'm kind of borrowing from of some of this. That in the medical world, they only, like, there's this huge audit that happens when someone dies on the table. Right. And of course, I mean, it's something that is really important, and they have to figure out what might have gone wrong, but it creates an environment in which they only reflect on failure. So the surgeons might play it safe, and they might not in a situation where they need to do something creative or risky to save someone's life, because they don't want to have to go to that room and spend 8 hours reflecting on what went wrong on the table. Instead of saying, okay, when we actually save someone's life, let's figure out everything that went wrong, went right, and also be open to the fact that we might have actually played the hand wrong and still won because of luck, right? That we could have won more money. You could have bet more. There's so many dimensions of it, and I won't push it too much further, because I know not everyone plays poker, but it's we don't audit our successes in the same ways that we do our failures. So when we succeed, we tend to attribute that to our grit and our hard work and our intelligence and our good choices. And then when we fail, it's hard to know how to figure that out. Some people will take full responsibility. Some people will externalize it, but it's very hard sometimes in life to, regardless of the outcome, say, really look at it from that analytical probabilistic perspective and say, wow, okay, like this is where I could have improved. I got the outcome that I wanted, but next time I might not get so lucky. And I need to still learn from my successes just as much, if not more, than I do my failures. Um, so for me, that's just like a huge piece in this whole game, that it's, once again, it's not to remove the autonomy from the individual to have this kind of stance on luck and choices and free will. It's just to say that you still can create an environment. You can improve your physical system so that you have the best probability of getting what you want, but you also have to be ready to not get it, as we started on, and know that you can rest in your laurels, that you made the right decision, even if, like, that you just gave yourself the best shot to succeed, even if it doesn't pan out. But know that in the long term, if you keep playing, if you don't give up based on that, eventually things will tip your way.
Yeah, that's such a great aspect to dive into, like a great analogy, I should say, about the poker hand, because you said that what really stuck with me, I wrote it down, like we could have played the hand wrong and still won, but we don't typically think to audit success in today's world. We just look at what didn't go wrong, how can I be better? But we could be better if we just looked at the wins as well. And like you said, like what didn't go well and we still ended up winning. And so I really enjoyed that. And looking back towards how you started that, that reference to Peter T and the poker player and the poker analogy, some things I wrote down that come to mind, like luck and choices and focus and willpower, all these different elements, I believe essentially build one's self-belief or not. And that's where I was going back with forming an identity that believes in choices. And yeah, there's luck, but when it comes to the outcomes I'm working towards, that vision I'm working towards, whether it's a goal, it's a lifestyle, it's an experience, it's a person, it's a job, it's whatever, I don't like to say that it's all on luck, because then why even try? Like that doesn't, to me, it doesn't resonate. So I built the identity of like, I'm going to make choices that are congruent with what I'm working towards. I'm going to focus on the positive aspect of what I want and what I'm experiencing, and always try to find the learning in something, whether it went the way I wanted or not. And I'm going to, by doing so, develop this self-belief that I do have some sort of shot at increasing the probability of what I want to happen in life. And that starts with self-belief. Going back to what we were talking about with Kanye, like he has this deep belief in himself to succeed at the visions he has in his mind, that people think he's crazy, but he just believes it. And yet look at what all the things he's done that the vast majority of people, looking at success on that label or on that playing field won't ever achieve. You know what I mean? Like to be able to have such an impact like that, like it's pretty profound. And it starts with belief. Going back to Russ, everything he does started out taught, self done, produced, written, mastered. Like he raps about that stuff, and now he has the plaques as evidence, as you worded earlier, of that self belief and that self drive, which increased the probability of life he has. And he even talks about it. He's like, the path I'm laying out right now that I took is what I took. It's not going to mean that you take the same path, you're going to have the same success, because we're not the same person. We're, what I mean? Like it's not that black and white. But here's what I did. Here's the lessons you can pull. And I think that poker analogy that you shared of just like, we could go in and we could get lucky by not knowing what we're doing and playing one hand and winning. But if we're going to stay there for 10 hands with professionals that study this, that live this, that play this, that know the rules, visible or invisible, that we're not even aware of, we're probably not going to get lucky every time, because the probability of getting a hand that would increase your luck of winning isn't going to be the same when the cards go around. And even with that, like let's say we just have two professionals, the deck being shuffled in a certain way isn't going to be, exactly what they're creating their probability in their minds off of. Maybe close, but they could end up getting a hand that they think the probability is better. They don't know the other person, so, or their hand. So it's just, there's all these factors. And so I think that's such a great way to put all that, because like you said too, like what comes to mind is like what we focus on in life expands. And if we're just focused on looking at what didn't go well and how can I improve, rather than what did go well and what also didn't go well to that success, did I miss? Did I look over to prevent the probability of the undesirable results happening in the future? I think that's such an interesting concept. And I don't know if you've pondered on that before, or if you're
Mm,
referencing Peter Tia in that conversation, but thank you for sharing that. Cause that just kind of like opened my mind to a lot of different things, and just the focus that I see society in today. It's like, going back to money, like people suppress their talents, their skills, their value to the world, their truth being expressed because they don't believe, because of other people telling them that that's not going to make money. And we're a money driven society today for good reason. One could argue in terms of like the reality where we are now, but maybe, stoically, if that's even a proper way of saying that, like maybe not for humanity.
mm,
But it's just
right.
so sad because that's what people, are born into. It's like, we have to make money. We have to pick practical paths to make money. I love how Jim Carrey put that. So often do we pick a path of fear disguised as practicality, of responsible, of
Mm,
safe. And it's like, then you end up wondering why you're sick and tired and not unhappy. And it's like,
mm,
but you're crazy if you don't go to college and you take an entrepreneurial route, or you empty your 401k to leave your corporate job that's slowly killing you, which is, our friend Mitch, his story, to do
mm,
something that you're passionate about. So yeah, I love that. I think, like, to summarize everything you said to me, it's just like, all those things about luck and choices and focus and willpower, depending on how you choose a perspective in that category, is going to build your belief in self or not. And depending on which one you take, which route you take in that perspective of self-belief and choice, all that, like, you're going to increase the probability of what you want, or you're
mm.
going to decrease the probability of what you want. And I think that like, fuck, like, people just understood that. I think, like, that's been a big game changer for me in my life. It's like, what am I focusing on? What am I choosing in terms of the beliefs and values and identity? And maybe, I can be in a place now where I'm comfortable saying this is my belief. And then you're like, well, here's another perspective I can offer. Oh, shit. So I believe in choices, but do I believe I even have a choice? Because if this is interacting with me and I thought I was going to do this, now it just changed my mind. I didn't want to run away from the car hitting me or coming at me, because I wanted to I wanted to walk down this path, but I also want to live. And this person just influenced my choice. So did I really have the free will to do that? That concept is so mind boggling to me. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a big one, and it's I guess to answer your previous question, that whole analogy is something that's played a big role in my life recently. And I think it's, like you said, it's important for individuals to have self-belief in life. Of course, I'm 100% a proponent of that, and also to take risks. And those are, they map just as well onto the same analogy, that it's a risk to show up to the table, but you have to have the belief that you could win, right? You can't take a seat at the table not thinking that you have what it takes to win, or of course you're never going to win, or you're just going to not show up at all. But of course it takes a lot more than that. And again, if one of us shows up and decides in our heart of hearts we're the best player at that table, that's not going to do shit for us if we haven't done everything that we need to going into it to increase our probability of winning to the highest degree. So I think it's more about calculated risk. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's, and maybe more of an abstract term, but because not everything is as clear cut as a game like poker where there's rules, and that's not quite how life works. But in some ways it does. And we know that there are things that reliably increase your chances of certain outcomes. There's things that you can do on a day-to-day basis, and that we know, that we have concrete research that say, hey, if you do these things, we can't guarantee anything, right? That's the beautiful thing about science. Nothing's 100% effective. We can say, hey, if you exercise 30 minutes a day, 71% of people will have this certain outcome. And it's say, okay, that's fucking great. I'll take 71%. I'll do that all day, and I'll pick and choose, and I'll find all the things that have the highest probabilities of me getting that certain outcome. And if I do those over time, one of those things will probably work for me, even if it's all the way down at 33%, which, back to an original point, that's the fucking placebo effect, right? I mean, the placebo effect is 33% effective. That's why it's so hard to get through blinded, double placebo or double-blinded placebo trials, uh, is because that's already 1/3 effective. So you already have to, it's a very competitive landscape. You have to beat the placebo, and it's already a very effective tool. I mean, they do sham surgeries, Josh, sham surgeries, the ACL repairs, where they go in and they just make an incision on half of the cohort, and those people heal. Like, it's a powerful thing because those people think that they're being treated. So it's not to be balked at. Like, sometimes I feel like people use that as like a, well, everything's bullshit because of the placebo effect. But no, you can harness that, right? You
Mhm.
can you can use that too. But my point being that even 33% is like, I'll take that every fucking day of the week if I can get something that I know is going to give me a 33% chance of the outcome that I want. If I can stack that upon three other things, that's getting me pretty damn close to where I want to be. So I think as long as people are able to think about things in these terms and lean on research and science and literally just run the numbers. I mean, you don't have to be a math oriented person to think this way, that you can say, this is giving me, if you find good research, this is giving me a better chance to accomplish the things that I want to. And you can take calculated risk. It's not like, dropping out of college, or even dropping out of high school to start your own business. It has to be a bad idea. Is it a calculated risk? And are you doing all the things that one needs to increase your probability of succeeding? And if you are, it makes total sense, but it's dependent on what you're doing, and what the probabilities, how those change. And if the average person just does it with no plan, and without improving and optimizing their physical system every way that they can, well, yeah, it's pretty irrational, and they're probably going to crash and burn. And that's why most people fail when they try to do ambitious things. But um not that everyone has to aim that high, or take that route, but at the end of the day, I just hope people know that, like, it's accessible, it's tangible. These are things that every individual can do in their everyday life to try to push towards certain outcomes that they want. And of course, it's essential not to be so tied to the outcome, at least in the short term. And I think that's where it all comes full circle, is that if you're willing to wait for something, if you're willing to delay gratification, and do and play the probabilities correctly, and rest in things that really do have, I know I'm kind of harping on it, but it's something I care about a lot, as far as really paying attention to research, and understanding the numbers of things. Because I think so many people spend so much time of their lives, like, putting efforts behind the wrong things. And I see people get so discouraged when they wonder why their efforts aren't yielding anything, and they're wondering why, they dedicate decades on something, and what they were basing it on was a sham. So it's the only way to really, not that you can't, in some ways, we'll say it again, get lucky and invest in something that doesn't have research behind it, because some risks maybe still are worth taking. And let's just say there's a new drug that, like, you feel strongly has is going to have a great impact on your life, and they haven't, the research hasn't come back yet, and you might just say, well, the risk is low for me to take this, so I might as well just take it every day and see if it works. And if one day the research comes out and it's great, then it's like, okay, I'm ahead of the curve, but the cost was low, the risk was low. um, so it's always, I mean, then that's kind of more of a cost benefit analysis, that you just have to pay attention to the risks and the costs, and then also look at the evidence and just weigh that and say, okay, this is what's worth doing. This is what's worth my time, my energy. These are the things that I know could be effective for me, and just rest in that. And outside of that, just let it happen, keep iterating, try to learn, and in time you'll get somewhere worth going, even if at times it feels like it's a little too cold or clinical, and maybe not quite as inspiring as some of the other messaging out there. But I think it allows you to sustain some hits, take some losses, and not get discouraged, because you're doing the right things, you're playing the right game, and in time it'll work out in the end.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree. And I think that's, looking beyond the facade of what you're seeing and finding, like, to bring it back to, pursuing the truth of things, like really what's going into that, and self-awareness, like, because that's something I just spoke to another entrepreneur today that was interviewing me about something. And I was just like, yeah, like There's a difference between being busy and productive, but it depends on where you're getting information about what you should be doing and what you're working towards, and if it's going to yield a result or not. And then going back to the placebo that you mentioned, and talking about self-belief, I mean, Russ says in his book, I mentioned, it's the second time I referenced it today, not just in this conversation, but another one about optimism or delusional or optimistic delusion, believing in something that you can't yet see, feel, touch, like hear or experience. And then that reminds me of Dr. Bruce Lipton and his book, The Biology of Belief, and Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and like looking at the brain and how if you just go all in on this vision, you can create those chemical responses in your body. And then that's going to allow you to take maybe more aligned action in life. That's going to increase the probability of the things you're working towards. But it really just comes down to like, do you believe in it? And I've talked to different, I've read and listened to and talked to different surgeons and doctors that were like, this person should have lived and this person shouldn't have. But because of their belief structures, the outcome was what we didn't expect. And it's like really fascinating. Like you said, like people do these mock surgeries where like they say they're going to do, maybe they do the surgery, but they don't really repair something, like your example, the ACL.
Mhm.
And it's just like, oh yeah, they believe. And like that, it's really relevant for me going through ACL surgery. One of the main things I was seeing as a risk factor for people not getting back to 100% in sport is their mindset, their belief that their knee is good now. And so I worked really hard at developing a belief before, during, and after ACL surgery to not let that affect me. Like I know, like this is going to work. I'll be good. And thankfully I had a good result and I competed for another, well, actually at that point I competed for another year. I rode for another 3 or so years on that same level. And I think that was, I got lucky with the surgery outcome, but I think I also put a lot of effort into it. So it's like, how do we justify? Was it luck? Was it choices? And same with the brain surgery. I saw the image of that thing and that tumor was massive. And they're like, yeah, I mean, you could try not having surgery and see how long until you don't wake up, or you can increase your probability by having the surgery. There's still risk you could die. There's risk you could become blind, paralyzed, have a stroke. 2 more pages worth of risks that I signed off of. And, one could say I got lucky with that surgery and the outcome. One could say the probability wasn't that high to begin with, and that's just a fear. So it's just, yeah, I love this conversation, but I just, the placebo just reminded me of our talk about like self-belief and just being so delusional and optimistic about something and believing in what you're doing is going to yield that result is going to increase the probability than if you just said, oh, fuck it, why bother? Especially when people are in jobs like corporate. I hear this all the time, especially with the clients I work with. They're just like, this isn't really fulfilling. And it's like, all right, well, we got to find some purpose in this, something to light you up while we work on something else maybe. But it's just like, you got to believe that it's out there. And I think that's something, if people believe that like the value they have existed, which we all know we all have value, whether it's just, lending an ear, sharing a story, whatever, like untapped skills and talents. It's just believing that it's possible. Like it starts there, because then that's going to create a whole different thought process, and that's going to lead to different behavior. And I think bringing this back to identity and self-belief, with your project, Imposters Anonymous, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on imposter syndrome, what you went through with creating the project, and was that the basis of why you wanted to create it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think maybe puts why I'm here in context as well. That it's yeah, it's something that I struggled with a lot, and I know that you've spoken to it a little bit already, and I guess part of the reason I started it was also because I feel like I don't know anyone who doesn't have a relationship with imposter syndrome, um and just that relationship that you have with yourself, and who you feel like you are and you ought to be, but also how you're perceived by the world and what qualifies you to do whatever you want to do, to provide value, various things in life. And that even, it seems, even those who achieve the highest degrees of success also are not insulated from this phenomena. That, the Maya Angelos and the, I'm not thinking of another example off the top of my head, but there's a laundry list of famous artists and, achievers, entrepreneurs who still feel like they're an imposter, or that they've been bringing something that this understanding that other people have of them, that they're kind of on, on their own Mount Everest, or that they're special, or that that they've people have come to understand them as something that is very much divergent from what's at their core. Um, and as it relates back to me, it was something that always held me back a little bit in life, especially in regards to this this project, or this avenue, this medium that I I guess just a brief background. I started in writing at a pretty young age, and that was always something that I was pretty passionate about. And I think probably if I'm disposed towards any sort of I guess I'd say academic or intellectual pursuit, I'd say it was writing at base. It was just something that always came pretty naturally to me. uh and in more of an academic sense to start, but when I went to college, I started writing more creatively, more abstractly. I it's hardly relevant anymore, and I tend not to even think about it, but I wrote a book when I was 18. And it was, it was small, but 25,000 words. It was a real book. I self-published it. It was, it's kind of a literary fiction sort of thing. I was more into that at the time. So I had, it's not that I hadn't done anything. I'd completed that, and that took a lot out of me, that I spent quite a bit of my life at that time working on that project. And it was, I guess, to put it into context, that was maybe the beginning of me trying to express myself, being willing to put that out to the world, uh, putting forward maybe what I thought my unique value was, or my unique perspective was, and having some sense of belief that that was something worth doing. To be fair, I think it's, to this day, most people who know me don't even know about it, and it was never something that I talked about that much, or tried to promote. So in some ways, that was, this imposter syndrome is what held me back on that front, where I was like, I mean, who am I? I'm just a kid. I'm 18. No one's gonna take me seriously. I've never written anything formally before. There's no way I could ever get this thing published formally. I just kind of independently self-published it online, and that sort of thing. And so I did it, and I was super happy with it at the time. I could never read it today, but um, yeah, I kind of just let it sit. And for years after that, I still wrote, almost daily, different creative projects, different ways of trying to express myself. I even made some music when I was younger. I was always trying to find my space to express myself, but never really felt comfortable sharing it very much. Never really felt like it was something worth being being totally outward about, and really offering up to the world. I never felt confident enough about it. And I guess to jump forward a bit, to kind of get us to last year, I had essentially, I'd had this urge, this itch to express myself in some way, and I felt like I had a voice. I had a voice that was something, right? I had been, the few people that I had shared myself with always had good feedback, and that was helpful. But sometimes you have these voices inside you that tell you, okay, it's just because they know you, and nobody wants to pop your bubble. Nobody, it's hard to believe your friends and family. And I never felt comfortable extending it past that. And so uh I guess, honestly, more than 2 years ago, I'd started with this idea of having a podcast as this space that was kind of expanding. And I was like, okay, I could take some of what I do really well as a writer, um, as a person who has this drive to express himself, and to share his ideas, and to show other people. I think why I kind of started writing at base was just trying to show other people that they weren't alone in the way that they felt, because that's what I got when I started reading at a high level. When I got into college, was like, I really took a dive into literary fiction and all different kinds of books, and I was just like, oh fuck, like I spent much of my life thinking I was very isolated and alone in the way that I thought, and the things I experienced. And much of that was the environment I grew up in. But having that experience through my reading, I was like, oh wow, like I could do this for other people. um, and so once again, maybe starting a podcast felt like that was a way for me to do that, in a way that was maybe the bar was a little lower. It's not like I was having to, write a novel every time I would record a podcast, and something that also was a little bit more accessible. It's a little easier for, people's attention spans are short, and not many people want to read a few hundred pages, but they'll listen to a podcast. So I had the idea, and as I've told you, I kind of did everything. I had microphones, I had equipment. I recorded a whole episode with a good friend of mine, who's an entrepreneur, and it just fell flat. I never released it. I never put it out into the world, and that was something that I always regretted. And I don't, honestly, to this day, I don't fully understand why I didn't do it. And I'm sure some of it was this imposter syndrome and me feeling like maybe it wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't qualified to be doing it. Like, what have I accomplished? What have I done? How do I qualify myself? Like, I'm just Brandon. There's no accolades after my name. I'm just a guy. Uh, and so I just never did it. And that was something that always kind of bothered me, but I'd forgotten about it to some extent. And then 2020 comes around, and I've got a lot of time on my hands, and I'm still having this itch. I'm still writing from time to time. I'm still having these deep conversations with people, and having people tell me that this is something that I ought to do, um, without me putting it forward at all. And I'm like, okay, I need to just really make this happen. But how can I do it in a way that will guarantee that I will not just back the fuck out on this shit and doubt myself to death? And it just kind of popped into my mind, like, what if I structured this project in a fundamental way that disallowed me from being so insecure that I couldn't share it with the world? And that was kind of the basis. And then what kind of snowballed from there, I was like, okay, can I have the sort of conversation that I want to have that promotes this in everyone? So if I make this an anonymous experience of sorts, that through Imposters Anonymous as it exists today, this could be a project that is, of course, kind of plays off of these kind of rehab spaces, if you will, for individuals. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous, there's whatever anonymous. This space, this therapeutic space of non-judgment, where individuals could come on, they could have conversations about whatever they wanted to have. Um, and it wasn't about how they were qualified. It wasn't about what they'd even necessarily done in the past. It wasn't about their race, their gender, their sexual orientation. It wasn't about any label. They could just express themselves. They could explore things, and I could do the same, as I always wanted to, and encourage people to just really share their voice in a non-judgmental space, and get into things that they otherwise wouldn't. And as soon as I realized that was something that I could do, that would allow me to take myself off the hook and say, like, hey, no one will even has to know about this. You could do this all on your own, and just see what happens with it. No one ever even has to know that you did this. And obviously some people know now, because it's essentially largely just my guests and maybe a handful of close friends. But um yeah, that was kind of how it all started, and what prompted me to get it going. And once I did, and I realized how many people really truly have this same experience of having something that they want to work on, something that they want to accomplish, or even just express, like they did a conversation they want to have, but they're held back because, whether it be culture or the political climate right now, or insecurity, or quite literally imposter syndrome, that they're just not saying things and then we're just not having the sorts of conversations that we need to have to grow and to audit our ideas, and to even just be capable of getting to a place where we can really do the things that we want to in life. So yeah, I mean, that's really where it all started for me. And of course, you were my first guest, which was awesome, and I think you played a big role in making it happen, just because I literally, like, I hadn't shared the idea, even really, I hadn't or really spoke it into existence while we were on a hike together. And I knew in that moment that was it, right? I knew. I hadn't even told my wife about it. Like, this was something that we just happened to get on the conversation. And I was like, if I say this now, it's happening. Like, if I tell him that this is something that I want to do, uh, I have to make it happen. And I guess the rest was history, as they say.
Yeah, you spoke it into existence. So it's awesome. And I remember that walk in the forest, as you, Kevin, and I like to refer to it as, and you were
Yeah.
telling me about it. I didn't know the exact background to the whole storyline. I knew the concept because I've obviously listened to your intro episode, and then you've talked to me about it and things like that about Imposters Anonymous. But I didn't know. I don't remember if you actually told me you recorded a full episode in the past
Mhm.
with your friend, and then the concept around Imposters Anonymous, which I knew because you explained it to me in the intro episode, but I didn't know it was that concept that allowed you to feel like you could move forward with creating
Mm.
it. That's really cool. And it's such a unique way of going about it. And I find that my cat's going crazy on his tree right now. I find that for me, the Gray Matters podcast was my own take on that, about talking about the gray area of life, the context, the substance of human beings. And it allowed me to just feel comfortable sharing these things because I'm like, oh, this is the gray area. Like it's not always, black and white, and it's not always what people think. I'm just gonna talk about
Mhm.
some real shit. And I've been on a different path, I'd say, or on this path for some years now, with this being more vulnerable and opening up. But then, of course, imposter syndrome still kicks
Yeah.
in, and I've talked to you about that extensively. With leaving BMX to work with older, more successful in my mind entrepreneurs, and I'm like, who the fuck am I to be helping these people as a coach or speaking, like things like that. And so it's just interesting. It's also interesting how the Gray Matters podcast and the Imposters Anonymous are like, we're having this
Mm.
conversation right now with the same intention of why we started it, to share and to not get so caught up on the black and the white, the labels, the titles, the race, the politics, the gender, the age, where whatever. And I love that because the episode you had me on, which I mean, it's amazing that to be able to have that opportunity to be the first guest and a part, because just like from start to finish, and us having that conversation walking by the river that day on that hike, and then you asked me to be your guest on it, like it was just, for me it was just really cool because I was like, oh man, this is like, I'm a part of something starting. And I love that because I know it's like, I told you from day
Mhm.
one, the concept, like I love that because I feel like it's going to give people a lot more confidence and faith in speaking their mind without having to justify or validate themselves. And where I'm going with this is, I don't think, I'm 99% sure I did not use the word BMX or brain tumor at all. Well, that's two words, but I didn't use either one of
Mhm.
those words or phrases at all in our 2.5 hour conversation on your podcast.
Mhm.
We'll have to go back to the recording to double check that. But
Yeah.
I believe that to
I think
be
so.
true. And in the 10 years, 11 years now that I've been interviewed, been a guest on podcasts, people have asked me about things. I've never had that experience. In
Mhm.
11 years, I've never had that experience where I just spoke my mind. I just had a conversation with someone, and there was no need. Yeah, you knew that stuff about me, so that we can give that context, but it was not necessary for the conversation because it was just genuinely like what we've been doing here. I haven't asked you about anything to validate why you're explaining yourself to me. And that's been my intention with having guests on the podcast, which was a huge imposter syndrome breakthrough for me, was to get to the point where I just said, fuck it. I just needed to have a conversation with someone. Stop thinking I'm not good enough to interview someone. Stop even looking at it as an interview. Just look at it as a conversation. And
Mhm.
so to be in this point, like it's amazing because I'm like, I love it. Like I'm still like nervous, especially talking with you. Someone I look up to is like a well-spoken, articulate person with a complex mind and thought process. Like I told you, I revamped my outline that you helped me create, and I just was like, man, I need to tighten this up. But to be in this place, the two of us sharing this conversation today, it's just a beautiful thing. And I think it's a testament to all the things we've been talking about. And one could say it's lucky that you're doing what you're doing and I'm doing what we're doing. And I maybe come in with the perspective, no, it's our choices. We chose to do this, but I think it's a combination of all the above. And to be doing this right now, I'm super grateful for it. Again, it's a part of the vision I've been creating for myself and what I want to do with my time and how I want to provide value to the world. And, yeah, I'm just super appreciative. And I think it's just really interesting how we both came to be friends, how that situation occurred, the whole shenanigans around that are comical, and then where we are today. And I just appreciate you, and I'm stoked to be able to share your mind on the Great Matters podcast. And I definitely think you'll be coming on again, whether solo or with someone else. So, um, Yeah. I kind of want to just take a step aside for a second, if that's cool.
Yeah.
We're getting to almost 3 hours right now. So this is officially my longest episode.
Whoops.
No, it's great. Like I welcome these. I've actually had people kind of softly turn me down because they're like, I'm really long-winded. I'm like, no, I welcome that. Like the
Mhm.
more the merrier, it's better. Because I want people to really understand the mind of the person speaking. Um, so yeah, no, thank you. Cause I think you, Kevin, and I know we had that little glip in there, that blip. What's the word I'm looking for?
Oh, right,
Blip.
right. Blip,
Yeah.
yeah.
But that was actually the longest one I've uploaded on my channel. So I'm stoked on this. So I want this to be more recurring with guests, to feel open to just rant. Cause I don't know about you, actually, this is the second to last question I want to ask you. I've had so many people that get on a tangent, and in a good way, they're flow, like they're just cruising.
Mhm.
And I don't know how much time. I don't care. I'm not watching the clock. If I am, I'm
Right.
just looking at timestamps for things to take note of for later. And then they go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "For what?" Like, "Oh, I just spoke so much." I'm like, "Do you realize I invited you to do that? Like, do you experience that? Have you experienced that yet?"
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, no, every episode for sure. I think pretty much everyone, at least whether it's on or off the record, in
Oh,
retrospect,
okay.
has that reflection where they're like, oh yeah, like I don't know, I was going way off topic, or I was saying way too much, or I don't know what I was going for there, and I mean, it's natural. Like I understand it because I feel that, and I don't often express it, but um, yeah, I think it's an important reminder just to know like that's what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's
I
good.
think you don't have like an immediate record of what that is, and I think often when people listen back to it, they're like, oh, okay, like that actually went really well. But often we kind of get this like kind of post-mortem, like immediately after they're like, they're trying to contextualize everything that they've
Yeah.
said, and you don't have this perfect record of it, so in that moment you're kind of like, oh fuck, like did I say anything at all? um but I mean, that's that imposter syndrome, man.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny how it creeps up in its various different disguises. That's funny. I always thought that was interesting because like I've never, until recently, I've never been on the hosting aspect of having a guest on. And
Mhm.
so I know in my past I've done that sometimes, but then I got to like being really aware, like no, they're wanting me to. And it took a couple of people telling me like, dude, just go, just say whatever you want. Like, that's why I want you here. So I always just think it's funny when people like, I kind of laugh out loud when they say that. I'm like, no, like say more. Like, do you have more? Like, come on. Like, I welcome that. So it's just funny. But yeah, so to kind of, put a bow on this conversation for today, like I said, we could probably continue these weekly
Yeah.
on a lot of different topics, especially as we continue sharing different resources and people with each other and just different thought provoking ideas. And the more I, as you were wording it, focus on peeling back my layers and seeing like, we even really talk about the shadow, and that'll be definitely on the next episode of what we
Next
talk
time, yeah.
about. But just exploring that whole world, it's just been really fascinating, and it's just it's just it's really cool to have these conversations with someone that understands and is on a similar wavelength of like wanting to look beyond the ego, like like Josh, like look deeper within ourselves and
Mhm.
to challenge ourselves. And I think that's why, I've taken a lot from you in that perspective of just your demeanor, your delivery, your the way you articulate things, even if it's like completely opposite of my belief, it allows
Mhm.
me to be like, oh, like let me look at it differently. When other people are like, no, fuck you, you're wrong. Like, like that's a vast, difference of spectrum. But I just appreciate that, and I think that that's something that I try to do more of. Um, and I thank you for that. And I just, yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that. That just came to mind. Just want to express my gratitude for that.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate that a lot.
So to like I said, to put a bow on today in this conversation, I want to end by asking you. We've talked a lot about success and choices and luck and focus and willpower and destiny and delusion and illusion and reality and all these things. And I'm curious, like, how do you define success for yourself, and how do you know that you are either achieving success or you've achieved success in your life?
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like for me personally, and you know what, I don't even need to qualify it. It's such an important part of my life to spend time uh, just kind of sitting with things. Um, I think formally you would talk about that as meditation, but it's it allows me to constantly audit my experience and how I really do feel about things. And I say that because I think there's a little bit of a gap between like the conventional understanding of what it means to feel something, um, and what it means to really sit with it and observe it and acknowledge. I guess as we've been talking about today, I'll stick with that same analogy of peeling back at least a layer or two and looking at it from that lens. And I feel honestly that when I do that, it becomes rather clear how I actually feel about what I've done. And I don't mean to be simplistic about it, but I feel like at the end of the day, when I spend time really observing my thoughts and feelings, um, or I guess the beginning of the day is how I typically do it. But I feel like that is when everything comes into focus for me the most. And that is when how I feel in those moments tells me more about, success or failure or the meaning of the outcomes I'm seeing in my life, more so than anything else. And I get that that's a little bit abstract, but I think it's once again a little bit different than just being like, I just like if it feels good, it must be success. Because I think what we experience when we're kind of in our default mode network, if you will, on a day-to-day basis is, what feels good then is often quite misleading. But when you take the time to really sit with it and observe it and let things build and watch where your mind goes and see how you even just feel physiologically, like how your heart is beating and how your stomach feels, and your head and your feet, everything, you become a little bit more in tune with that sort of thing. And not to get too woo woo with it, but I think it's something that I'm always aware of, and I think I know when if I'm able to have that pullback, which is hard to do. I will certainly mention, and sometimes it's only once a day that I ever have that pullback, that I maybe peel back a layer or two, and I come into myself, and I can really recognize how what my experience is telling me. And once again, we very much spend most of our lives not in that mode, and that's why it can be so hard to understand and filter through uh, what success really is to us, or what our feelings really mean. Because what feels good, I mean, that's kind of useless, right? I mean, do what feels good. That doesn't get anyone anywhere, because drugs feel great. You know what I'm saying? Like there's lots of things that feel good, but when you really sit with them, I think there's always a certain internal awareness that maybe what I guess I'd say I'm a firm believer that everyone has some sort of internal compass or morality that is there, and I think people know when they're doing things that are immoral, or that they're doing things that make them actually feel bad at their core. Um, and I think we, for probably good reason, don't always spend time on a day-to-day basis totally in touch with that. But for me, on the day-to-day, when I am able to sit and spend some time in silence, I'm able to kind of do that audit, and how I feel in those moments often tells me all that I need to know about where I'm going and what I'm doing, and what I maybe need to adjust, or if there's something that I need to address or cut out, or just that I need to change, that isn't really driving me towards who I want to be, or maybe is pulling me towards, as I referenced earlier, that version of myself that I know is not optimal.
I like that. I didn't expect that. I kind of expected you to go that route, but like not materialistic or like accolade or something like that. But because I find that's like what most of society defines success by, which creates a lot of unhappiness because they don't have those things, but because they're choosing, maybe unconsciously, maybe consciously,
Mm.
who knows, of how they're defining success to them. And that's something that I've learned to change because I grew up in an environment that, praised people with, money or becoming a lawyer or getting this degree or doing that or whatever it was. So I always thought success meant, I'm successful if I, have a successful in terms of money business, or I'm making good money, or if I'm going to that college, or if I made it here. And then when that was all kind of stripped away from me and my life was challenged, I was like, what does success mean? And then that led into the other, that the next evolution for success for me was, am I healthy? Am I happy? Am I doing what I love? And then that evolved into today. What my current belief around success is just, am I, being congruent with the way I'm showing up in life in terms of, how should I word that? Am I showing up on a daily basis, and is that congruent with the vision I'm holding in my mind? Meaning, am I aligned with the direction of where I want to go? Not am I there yet, because I know that putting success as a destination is just setting yourself up, I believe, for failure, because I think that's short-lived. And I think that's why a lot of people get into trouble chasing external success, because then, you can never get enough of it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just, I like how I kind of was wondering if you're going to go that route, but you said like you were using feeling to describe success, but then you said you weren't relying on feeling, so to speak, as terms of like, does this feel good? But more like auditing, I think you said at the start of your day, you do this like with your meditative practice and just kind of auditing, like, where am I, how does this feel, what's like things like that. Cause I find that like, if you just like, for me, if I just feel like I'm making progress in life based upon where I want to go, and are the actions, the experiences, and the choices I'm making, are they congruent with the future that I'm working towards? To me, that is success, on top of, am I healthy? Am I happy? Am I lifting other people up? That's a big proponent of my or definition of success is it just me, or is it other people? For me, success is like helping other people. Like if I'm able to help one person every day, then awesome. Or just a week, or just in general, then I feel like I've done my part. Because for me, I'm more focused on purpose, because being focused on self for so long um, was short-lived. That I refer to that as my past BMX career and life and all that. So yeah, very, very cool. One thing I did want to ask, actually, I know that I said I had one question, but little white lie.
Okay.
What's something, and I know this is like one of those cliche like endings as to conversations, something like that, and maybe not, but I'm always fascinated by, at this point of a conversation, with all the things we've said, with someone that's like, there's two different avenues I want to ask you, or two different questions, two different avenues we can go. Someone's like, cool, all these things are great. What's one thing that's practical that I can do to just start with from this conversation moving forward? Like, what's one thing I can do to kind of implement some of these things, or to peel? We'll go with the analogy of peeling back the layers. Like, what's one thing I can do to, if someone's curious of peeling back those layers and looking within? What's one thing you'd recommend that's worked well for you, or that you think could help someone else on this journey of like self-discovery?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, actually, because it was something that was kind of on my mind, and I didn't feel like I quite had the chance to say it. And it's more so just a question to consider for individuals. And I think it'll put a good bow on everything. And it's just that if you're having problems with your identity, and I mean that relatively broadly, if you feel like you're not who you ought to be, you feel like you're not who people perceive you to be, um, you're maybe afraid of who you are, you're trying to hide who you are, you're trying to protect something inside of you. I think everyone has some version of this, and there's lots of different manifestations of that, whether that be in how we think about our bodies, or our work, or anything that we do in the world, our relationships. If you're struggling with any of that, I simply ask you to consider what that next layer is really like. And if what you're holding inside of you, if what you think you truly are, if that is actually a base reality or not. And I say that largely to just compel people to consider that maybe this this concept of imposter syndrome, or any of the downstream effects of it, that maybe what we feel like is so important for us to conceal, or that we're so afraid of the world might see, that is truly us, or that we're so worried about judgment, or all these other things, of something that is so fundamental and intimate and close to us, that we cannot sustain the injury that it would create if someone really saw that and did not think highly of it. That maybe that's just as much of an illusion as the self that you offer to the world. And maybe what's really inside of you is far more complicated than anything that you understand, and that you don't have to identify with that you don't have to identify with anything, any of the thoughts that you have, any of the experiences that you've had in the past. It's just experience. And or at least just consider that maybe that's just it, and that there's nothing final or concrete about it. And yeah, I just ask individuals to put that question forward, and to consider that maybe if there's something that you're hiding, that maybe it doesn't have to say anything about you. um, and that you have the opportunity to not identify with that, and to just experience life for what it is. And I know that's easier said than done, but maybe just consider that, maybe just consider what that next layer might be. Or maybe that there's no core at all, and that it's not worth beating yourself up about.
Yeah, I love that. It's not about if it's simple or difficult. It's about holding the intention, because the intention opens up the door of possibility of discovering what you're looking for, experiencing what you're after. And I love how you chose a question as an answer to a question. I'm always a fan of that, because it just gets the brain to open up. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And on that note, that's something I love, is like not being judgmental of things with ourselves, other people, just being curious. It's a big test. It's very challenging. It's pretty simple in theory, but it's very challenging, to just not hold judgment, but to hold the intention of being curious. And that's what I've learned to do with myself, and I share that with my clients or anyone that asks for advice about anything. I'm like, one, be a guardian of where you spend your time, audit that, and two, be as curious as you possibly can about everything in your life, because when you
Mhm.
remove the judgment, then you can find more clarity. And when you're putting things into practical steps, especially something new, taking away the judgment is going to lead to that fuel, that motivation moving forward, rather than you holding this, oh, I messed up, or I'm not good, like all that, the imposter stuff. Like, you can just be curious. I mean, I feel like curiosity could kill imposter syndrome, just by what am I to learn from this? Why is this happening? Things like that. So I mean, I'm a big fan of that question as an answer to a question. And on that note, we'll wrap it there. And again, Brandon, thank you so much for coming on the Gray Matters podcast, for having this conversation. There's so much in here. I'm so excited to share this and to see what people think. And I appreciate you having me on your podcast, and then you coming on here and just sharing and opening up your mind. And I learned a lot of things about you that I didn't know, which is obviously going to happen with these types of conversations. And so I appreciate you always being open and encouraging and challenging with me, even if you don't mean to do that. Like I said before, like the way you put things always has me thinking differently. So I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to our next adventure in the forests and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been awesome, man. And I know you've shown me some gratitude, and I'd love to do the same. You really are a huge part of the reason why I did any of this in the first place, and why we're having this conversation. And regardless of whether you even recognized it at the time, like, you were a huge part of all of this for me. And it's incredible to be here doing this. I guess the third time now, and to be on the other side of it has been a lot of fun. But yeah, man, I just like to say thank you for all that you do, and you've always been an inspiration for this project, and part of the reason I keep pushing forward on it. So thank you. And to all those still listening after 3 hours, y'all rock. And this has been really fun, and thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, thanks to those that listened to all this point or up to this point. And if you are interested, go check out Imposters Anonymous. Brian's got a lot of great content on there, great project, a lot of great people on there just speaking their truth. That's how I see Imposters Anonymous, just speaking truth, and there's no need to validate someone's truth because it's your truth and you own it. So again, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to us hanging out in real life, because if you're watching, it is now getting dark in our evening of the East Coast of America. So that's why everything's kind of looking shadowy and everything. But yeah, thanks again, man.
Yeah, no, thank you.